Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 60 of the Former Action Guys podcast, and I'm your host, Justin Kramer. And this week I have retired Lieutenant Colonel David Armstrong back on. You might remember him from the episode 54, I believe. He was on talking about his time at Anglico, his time in Mogadishu in Somalia, and stuff like that. He's also on the board of directors for the Marine Corps Museum or the Marine Heritage Foundation. So very interesting talk, and I'm looking forward to our talk today. As always, make sure to check out my website, jkramergraphics.com, and my Instagram page at jkramergraphics and at Former Action Guys. That's jkramergraphics.com. Make sure to hit me up and leave comments on the YouTube channel, and make sure to leave Apple Podcast reviews. Appreciate it and enjoy. I am good on my end.
I'm good on my end too. All right.
Well, welcome back, man.
Thanks. Good to see you again. After 3 hours, I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to talk to me again, but here we are.
For sure. Well, I mean, oftentimes I run into the problem of 3 hours is just not enough, especially for someone like you who was in for more than like one enlistment. You have an extended period of time and you've done a multitude of things. So it's hard to like capture all that in a 3-hour podcast even. And I know some people don't listen to the entire thing. Some people aren't going to make it through 3 hours. So I'd like you to start. I'd like to give you an opportunity up front to give your pitch about the Marine Corps Heritage or the Marine Corps Museum and the Heritage Foundation.
Sure.
That way more people are exposed to that rather than waiting to the end where less people are there.
Yeah,
so
that
go
sounds
ahead
great.
with that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I am one of the newest board members on the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, which is essentially the foundation that runs the, our Marine Corps Museum. And one of the comments I made last time we talked was like, the thing that really makes that museum special to me is that as Marines, when we think about like the way Marine Corps does stuff, right? Like you would think that the Marine Corps Museum was like an old World War II Quonset hut with a rusty World War II Amtrak out in front of it, right? And some stuff inside. It's not like that at all. I mean, it was voted by USA Today as the country's best historical museum. So I mean that's up against things like the Holocaust Museum. I mean, this would put anything that the Air Force does to shame. Like it is a 5-star facility. You walk into it, you're just like, I can't believe the Marine Corps did this. And the reality is, it was the donors that did it. But it's a great foundation, and really that place, we as Marines, we need to understand like that's our cathedral, right? Like that is, like our chapel, if you want to get religious about it, but really it's a cathedral to us. And what the Heritage Foundation has done has been just nothing short of amazing. And a lot of the money is raised by just grassroots donors, the Marines that get out there and donate 25 or 50 bucks. Or they go there and they see, wow, this is an amazing facility, and they donate a lot. I mean, it's hard to believe, but we have former Marines that have donated, like individually donated $1 million or even more. I mean, it's just amazing.
That's awesome.
The amount of money that people have given. And, there's ways to set it up where like, hey, if you pass away and you want it to be part of your estate, they have a whole plan, giving group and everything. But I don't want to get into development. I mean, if there's any Marines that are out there that are interested in donating to the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, first go to the website. If you get confused or if you really want to get in touch with somebody in the development department, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn and all that stuff. But anyway, they're finishing up what they call the Legacy Walk and some of the exhibits, and really. Right now, it kind of ends at 1976, late 70s, early 80s period. So you can get all the way through the Vietnam exhibits and stuff like that. It's really great. And they were supposed to have the next segment open, which is more like our generation, right? Let's just call it like 80 to present. And so, the big stuff, the Gulf War, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And the current wars. But some of the funding got diverted, unfortunately, because the Headquarters Marine Corps had money allocated to the museum to finish up that section. And with the hurricanes that came through Camp Lejeune, whatever, however you want to pronounce it these days, I just can't bring myself to do it.
I know, me neither.
But it's just
I'm
hard,
the same way.
Like, I mean, I understand they want to honor him in the way he pronounces his name, but I just didn't. It just doesn't instinctively come to me.
Was that ever confirmed? That's actually how he pronounced his name. Like, how can you mispronounce a general's name for decades and not notice?
You know what? I should have asked that question when somebody corrected me last time. Next time, that's going to be my response. Is like, who is the convening authority on the actual pronunciation of this word, and how did we get it wrong for so long? But anyway, So the opening of that has been delayed a little bit, but man, it's going to be awesome because I've done a behind the scenes tour of what they've got up already, and like they've already got the F-18 that was the first F-18 to take off out of Andrews Air Force Base flying cap on 9/11. They've got one of the original M60 tanks that went over the berm in Desert Storm. They got LAVs, they got 1908s in there. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. And I mentioned this last time on the podcast, but for those people that didn't make it all the way to the 3 hour and 25 minute mark, they have built a replica city block of Fallujah. Now, I wasn't there. I've never been to Fallujah, so I don't know what it looks like. But when I walked into it and I saw it, I was like, whoa. I mean, like this looks legit to me from just seeing pictures and stuff. And they tested it out and they brought some people back, and when they figured out that it was just evoking such incredibly vivid memories that they figured out that they needed to have like a cool off dark room for people to go in and collect themselves in. And so it's that powerful. So I think people who are, really yearning for something to represent their era of service, like we all love talking about Bellewood and Iwo Jima and stuff like that, but like a lot of it is personal to us in our generation, and that's coming in the next year or two. And man, stand by because it is freaking fantastic.
Yeah. What's your favorite exhibit at the museum?
So I really like the Vietnam exhibit because you start off by walking through the chassis, the ass end of a 46, right? So you're coming out as if you're walking from where like the door gunner or the crew chief would sit, and off the ramp and down, and you see like a mortar pit set up, and they've got it humidity controlled. So when you walk off, you feel it. I don't think it feels anything like Vietnam because it's not 100 and some odd degrees, but like the humidity is high and the heat is high. Like you get that sensation of you've just walked into a new climate environment. Another part that I think is really amazing is the Iwo Jima, the flag, the second flag at Iwo Jima. They have the original flag too, but I think they have the second one that's on display a little bit more often. But that's an amazing thing to just see. I mean, just to look at that thing and say, that is it. Something really powerful about that. And then right behind that, they have an Eagle, Globe, and Anchor that represents, I think, every 10 Marines that were killed. And it's just this huge, I mean, like it really puts into perspective how many people died in World War II. And what's interesting, if you look at it real close, if you come to the museum, you can just walk in and walk around like any museum. They also have docent tours, and so you'll learn about this. But they've got, if you look real closely, not everything on there is an EG&A, right? There's a couple of Navy things, obviously, for the corpsmen, but then there's actually a Coast Guard one in there too, because there were some people killed who were in Coast Guard in World War II with the Marines in the Pacific. So kind of neat to learn those little things.
I didn't even know we had a Coast Guard then.
Well, whatever it was, there was something, because that emblem is right there, and the docent made a big deal out of it. But yeah, and so it's also really cool too, because it also facilitates events. So they'll host your retirement there, they'll host a promotion there, they'll host a wedding there, they'll host anything like that there. So it's pretty cool. They've got outside, they've got a walk that you can walk on that has plaques from different units that units have self-funded to put up there. So that's kind of a cool thing to do. And they're extending that walk a lot. And then they have the bricks. So you can actually get online and buy a brick. And I think they're like $300, which is not a cheap brick, right? But like if you want to put, like, if you had a buddy that you wanted to memorialize, a friend that you lost, or even your own service or anything like that, like you can buy those bricks and they're just packing them in there. It's really cool.
That is cool.
Be able to,
I know a lot of places do that as a fundraiser. It seems like a pretty effective way to raise funds. Question: do people donate their own personal stuff to the museum? And for two questions. One, do people donate stuff to the museum? Two, do you have anything of your own that's in the museum?
So I'll answer that in reverse. I do not. About the oldest thing I have is my original pair of boots that I got issued, the old black Cadillacs.
I still have mine somewhere.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm going to keep. I just walked too many miles in those things and experienced too much pain in them. But so I personally don't have anything that I've ever offered to donate. I will say this. I get asked this question a lot. Like, people say, hey, I've got these letters from my father in World War II and everything. Here's a really interesting statistic about the museum. And as I understand it, this is pretty applicable to most museums, that of everything they have, only 20% of what they have, and I'm roughing that number, is on display in the museum. So 80% of all the artifacts that the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation has is in storage somewhere.
Really?
Which is just, I mean, I can't, but like, doesn't it make you wonder? Like I'm envisioning this thing from like Raiders of the Lost Ark, like
Yeah.
that movie, and just wondering what it is that they have in there. So I think the thing that I tell people about donating is, and I don't have a good point of contact for that. I can get one, and maybe we can put it in the show notes. But I would think that if something's really important to you, like letters from your grandfather, or something like that, the likelihood of them being, put up for display in the museum is really, really low. You may want to consider how important that is as a family artifact.
Yeah.
No,
that makes sense. That is crazy though. What an awesome job that'd be to be the person that gets to comb through like all the stuff, like figure out what's going to go on display and stuff like that. Like I would totally get it. I would totally get down with doing a job. Like, see, I could totally see myself working in a museum, doing research and stuff. Like I'm a super curious individual. So like I just research stuff constantly, and like working at a museum or like, researching artifacts is something that I could totally do. But yeah, I always. Oh, go ahead.
That's pretty cool. Like I think about it like if we were back in the Marine Corps, right, and we walked into the gun park or something like that, and a couple of Marines ordered us like, "Hey, go clean out those quad cons." We'd be like, "Fuck, man, fucking God." But like all of a sudden you're like, "Hey, those 5 quad cons have a bunch of historical stuff. You want to go root around in it?" We'd be like beating each other down to get into there and check it out. But yeah, I know it'd be pretty cool just to root through some of that stuff. Yeah, they've also got all of the footage. Here was something else I learned. They have all of like the video footage that was shot. Right, it was just like. Most of it you've never even seen. It's still in the cans, like undeveloped or whatever. And so the University of South Carolina College of Library Sciences, or whatever that's called, I probably just slaughtered that. And my apologies to any Marines whose major was library sciences. But they have a whole division there that does nothing except archive old pictures and film, like get it into the digital state so that it's not deteriorating, because that film is all deteriorating very quickly. Yeah. So the University of South Carolina has the entire collection of all footage shot in World War II.
Really?
And digitizing it. And they're going to put it up on the web so you could just go in and click on anything and watch whatever. It will all be open source, which is amazing. Because think about that, like the stuff that people haven't seen from that war or that campaign,
There's some really good Instagram pages that, people wonder where they get some of the footage and stuff. And I know a lot of them request it. You can go through the Library of Congress and stuff like that and request like that old World War II footage and Vietnam footage. And I know a lot of pages do that. They go through the Library of Congress or whoever those people and pull that old footage. So to be able to have a library of all of that, like when they get done with that, that's sick. That's pretty cool. Especially if someone looks at that and they use it to go find like a video of like an old relative or something like that. Like that's super cool.
It's going to be really awesome. So, I guess my, as we transition away from that topic, I think the thing that I would love for all of your listeners to hear is like, hey, look, if you're a Marine, or even if you have an interest in the Marine Corps, or you're thinking about joining the Marine Corps, like I don't know what your audience looks like. You have family that was in the Marine Corps, and you are in the Washington, D.C., specifically the Quantico area, do not miss the Marine Corps Museum. I'm telling you, like, it's better than the Smithsonian, the Holocaust, like, no offense to any of those, but, like, it is such an amazing facility that if you walked into it, you would walk out saying, like, I can't wait to come back here, and I can't believe the Marine Corps did something like this. This is just amazing. So check it out for sure.
I was talking to my buddy Michael Hanthorne, who's been on a couple times. And I think he's going to do an episode here pretty soon. And he was in Fallujah, and I was telling him about what you were saying about how they redid a street and stuff like that. And I think we're going to plan something at some point to go up there and see it, because neither one of us have been to the Marine Corps Museum. Both of us were at Camp Lejeune. I don't think he was there. I think he left. I think he got out before the Marine Corps Museum was built. I was up in that area a couple times. I was up in Little Creek doing like TSP school and stuff like that.
Yep.
But I never made it over.
Away, though.
It's still kind of far away, but like I know my family came up one weekend, and for whatever reason, I left it up to my kid to decide what we would do. I'm like, hey, we could go to this Carl's or some kind of caverns, like caves, or we could go to the Marine Corps Museum. And he was like, I want to go to the caves. And I'm like, damn it. Like,
and the caves aren't that cool. Like once you get
I shouldn't have even given them an option. Like, what was I thinking? So we ended up going to the caves, and I haven't seen the museum yet, but eventually I'll make it up there.
Yeah, good. Well, like I said, if everybody just kind of hears me say like, hey, look, like if you haven't been there, go.
Yeah, for sure. So to you, We stopped, for those that haven't, I already recorded the intro before we started, which I normally don't do. But for those that haven't heard your other podcast, I would tell people to go back and listen to that, because that's going to give them a breakdown of like the beginning of your career up until you were like a captain, right? I think we stopped about the time you were a captain, because we talked about your time at Anglico.
That's
correct?
right. Yeah, we had covered like TBS, OCS, my first artillery battalion, and then how I deployed to Somalia. Then I was at First Anglico, and we kind of ended up there as we kind of wrapped up my Anglico career. But I will tell you this, like, thanks for having me on as a guest, because I have been reconnected with so many people that I haven't talked to in 25 or 30 years that heard your podcast. Like I had, an enlisted Marine that was at Anglico with me and reached out to me. He was like, "Hey, like, man, I just heard your podcast on Former Action Guys, and like it was so awesome to hear your stories. Like I remember that." And he was like, "Yeah, Dillard was Motor T, man. You had it right. He did something else first." So.
Oh, really? See, I never knew he was a lat mover. That's crazy.
He must have been. Yeah, this guy. So the guy I'm telling you about right now, his name's Chris Tabor. He's a fan of your podcast, but he was Sergeant Tabor at the time.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that people are, that it's getting out there, that more people are listening, and that stuff like that's happening. I've had other people tell me that, oh, my buddy heard me on the podcast. We're like, that's crazy. That's sick though, because that's, I think doing the podcast itself, and you can tell me as a guest, cause I'm on it every time, obviously, but as a guest that comes on once or twice, I feel like a lot of the guys hit me up afterwards and they talk about all the stuff that they thought about that they hadn't thought about in like years, even after the podcast. So like all these memories are coming back because of the stuff they talked about during the podcast. It's like kicking up, you're opening up doors you hadn't opened up in forever. And it's like, oh right. Yeah, we did that one field, or, oh yeah, that one dude, and, so I don't know. For me, it's great that guys are getting to tell their story and they're getting it out there, and it's allowing them to relive some of those memories that may have started to slowly fade away as life goes on and you get out of the military and you go become a regular dude or whatever, and then to have people reach out to you and tell you that they heard you and that it also brings back memories for them, that's awesome for me. That's right. That's like a great thing for me to hear. So
it's it was a great opportunity too, because like my family, who has nothing to do with the Marine Corps, were like, wow, I'd never heard that story before. I didn't know that story about that. Mm-hmm. And you and I know this, like, you don't just bring up stories out of context about your time in the military with your family. Like, hey, let me tell you about this one time where I was out in the field. Like, it just doesn't happen. So my family was like, wow, I never knew that. So
that's the other huge thing that I think that this podcast is great for, and why I encourage people. Like I hate being that guy. I don't want to be that guy where I know someone and the only reason I'm calling them is like, hey man, you should come on my podcast, Yeah. But at the same time, and a lot of people tell me no, which is totally cool. And they're totally like, hey man, I just don't, this is not my thing. I don't really want to talk about it. And I'm totally fine with that. And I don't pressure anybody to come on here. Yeah. I do, for those that are listening that are considering, that I've reached out to and maybe considering it, you got to understand that you're not only telling your story, but you're recording it for history, and for your family to hear, if you have kids, your kids to hear, maybe your grandkids to hear, but also like guys that are in the military to hear, that lessons learned, we're not, I don't know. It's just, you're putting something out there that's going to hopefully be out there forever, because right. I've heard, as a kid or growing up, I heard, it was somewhere, I don't remember where I heard it, that like most people are forgotten after like 2 generations,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it's just the way it is, like there's 7 billion people on the earth. There's no way people are going to remember you. Doing something like this, though, guarantees that there's a record of what you did and, things that you saw that's out there that people can look up. Maybe, in 2 generations, there's an archivist for the Marine Corps Museum that digs up this podcast. It's like, oh, this would be really cool to have some of this audio,
right.
It's stuff like that. And I think that's important for, I don't know. I think people downgrade their own service, because so many people are in the military, it almost seems normal. But right. In reality, like anybody that was in the military, that's not normal. Like that's abnormal to the average person. And your story is definitely something that should be recorded. And I don't know, people downgrade their own service. They don't think that other people should have to hear it or would want to hear it. And some people think that other people don't deserve to hear it because they weren't in the military and stuff like that. And I totally get that too. But I do think that something like this is a great thing to just record history and have people come on
Right.
And recently I had my dad come on for the Father's Day.
Yeah, I saw that. I haven't listened to it yet, but I saw that. It's cool.
Because we never sat down and really talked about, like, we've briefly like talked about stuff about the military, but I've never sat down and had a 3-hour conversation. And now that I've been in the military, even though he was in the Army, like, whatever, he was in the Army, and I decided to join the Marines, we can still understand each other on a lot of stuff, like that military speak, like I get it. So when he talks about, working and stuff in Germany and stuff like that, I understand it. And I think it's good for me, my half brother, my oldest half brother, my brother, and my sister, to all have that. And, for my kid and stuff to have that as like, they can look back and be like, oh, grandpa was in Gulf War, and he was served in Germany in 1974, whatever. And I don't know. That's just my whole thing with the podcast and why.
But I'll say this too, like to the people that you're friends with that you've invited to be on the podcast, and they've been sort of like, I'm not sure. Like sometimes just time helps, right? Yeah. Like maybe don't feel like doing it now, and that's cool, and you respect that, and we all respect that. But at some point, maybe some of those people listen to a few more of these things and say like, you know what, like I changed my mind. Or whatever it is that I don't want to talk about is farther in the past now, so I'm more comfortable about it. So I bet you see some people kind of,
Oh, I'm sure people will come around. I mean, I have a good amount of people that reach out to me already. There are definitely people that I know personally that I'm like, hey, what's up, man? Because I know that they did like crazy stuff, or they're just a good person. Like overall, like their story should be told. But I have people hit me up about. I just got an email from a guy. I think he was in recon in the 80s, and sent me his whole bio. I was like, hey, if you have a spot, hit me up. And I'm like, all right, So, which is cool. I'm totally glad that people are doing that, and I keep doing it. Hit me up on my email, formeractionguyspodcast@gmail.com, and send me your bio. But like I said, I just want to keep putting people's stories out there, and I think it's great that we're doing it. And I think like for people like you. And, eventually me, as we get older and people start to forget about those past conflicts, like you were in Somalia. Who really talks about Somalia anymore other than guys that were there, or guys that were in the military around that time frame, or just in the military and grew up watching Black Hawk Down, and that inspired them to join the Marine Corps or join the military, because that movie alone like inspired a lot of people, I think, to join the military.
Yeah, it was like the next version of Top Gun. It was almost like, I don't think it was made as a recruiting movie, but I think it definitely created some interest in joining the military.
Oh, for sure. Especially, when guys saw how the Delta guys would run around on the the movie, they're like, I want to be the Delta, I want to be that dude. But like those little conflicts, and unless guys like you sit down and talk about it, then no one knows about it. The only thing we're going to know about it is what someone makes like a documentary or something. I'd rather hear from somebody that was there, I think I sent it to you. I don't know if I did or not, but I watched this video about, it was at West Point. It was like the West Point military, some kind of military thing at West Point. They had 3 guys come on that were in Somalia during the whole battle, Battle Mogadishu or whatever, and to discuss like their roles in it. One was a sergeant major, I think, for the Rangers or something like that. I mean, it was 3 guys. Did I send that to you? If not, I'll
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
I'll shoot it over to you. It was like a 2 or 3 hour panel where these 3 guys sat in front of a classroom full of, cadets and just kind of talked about their time and their different roles. And 2 of them were actually like on the foot movement to the helicopter that, got blown up and got, took care of the casualties that they took along the way and stuff. So, really interesting conversation, but again, like having that kind of detail, like some of the stuff that these guys talk about, you'll never have unless it's recorded, unless someone sits down and records that conversation. Because we can give a general overview of like what happened in Mogadishu or in Somalia in general, like over months and stuff like that, or even in that specific battle. But to hear it from the guy that was actually there, that could tell you what the dust smelled like, what the sounds of running through the streets sound like. Or like you talking about going through a weapons bazaar, going into a weapons bazaar and knowing like, what are we doing? Here we go. We're going to go. It's just, I don't know, man. It's just crazy like that, but I'm rambling on, but I'd like to get back into your career. We like I said, we were talking about you being at Anglico, and how everyone had told you that was going to ruin your career, which I found really interesting. Which it didn't. I don't know. I mean, do you think it ruined your career? You made it to lieutenant colonel.
I mean, well, what career? So, but at the time, and to kind of recap, I was planning to get out anyway. So like when somebody threatened that, hey, going to that unit's going to ruin your career. I mean, my response was exactly that to my battalion commander, like, what career? I'm getting out. So I don't have a career. So, I'd rather have, go to a unit I'd go get to do some fun in. And I was in 511, which was a non-deploying battalion. So, I mean, with the exception of Somalia, like we didn't do UDPs or MUs.
Really?
So like, man, I was like, shit, I joined the Marine Corps because I wanted to see something, and I ended up at 29 Palms for a year and a half, so, which was great for training. I mean, like, look, if you're an artilleryman, like, and if you're a career artilleryman and you are not doing everything in your power to get to 311, you are missing out on one of the most amazing opportunities to develop yourself as an artilleryman that exists. Because like 511, when we were out there in the field, man, there were no gun positions. You know this if you've been there. There's no gun positions. Your CO says, we're going here.
Yeah.
And you set up and you shoot a target, and you may move right into the impact area and set up your next battery position there. Like EOD, ordnance, like nobody ever thinks anything. But man, you stray 1 foot outside of an OP or a firing position at Camp Lejeune or Camp Pendleton, and you would think that it was full of punji stakes or something.
Is that in the Joint Regs? God.
You're right. Yeah, right. So it was just amazing. And I know we already talked about this, but I'll just end it with saying this. Like, somebody posted, one of my friends on Instagram posted a picture of a 1908 like as a static display outside of a unit, and I was like, man, what an amazing weapon system that was. And there was nothing to it, right? That was just sights and aiming posts and aiming circles, and we would go out there and lay that battery, using survey and old school stuff. And we'd shoot fine. And I'll fast forward a little bit, but like when I'll tell the story when I became a battery commander about how reliant people have become on technology, how I think it's absolutely ruined the institutional knowledge base of artillery at the new staff NCO level.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Like if you want to go ahead and talk about that, like I completely agree. Like,
yeah.
I think I got to 10th Marines in 2009, and I want to say if I wasn't there when every battery was on 777s, they were getting pretty close. I think by that time frame they were swapping out and stuff like that. And you would hear some of the older like battery gunnies and stuff, or like, the facts that would come out, the field artillery chiefs that would come out. And when the guys would go from shooting dig to, shooting like old school, using sights and stuff like that, it would take them a little bit to bust the rust and kind of get in the groove of being able to do it quickly, because it's not something that they train to as much.
Yeah.
Shooting iron sights on your M777, is just a little different than, I don't know, having, now they have a GPS on it that tells you right where you're in the right spot, and it's linked to a computer that's sending back data. Like,
yeah, which is great.
Crazy.
Right. Which is great until it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Right. And so now what I'm scared about, and maybe this doesn't matter anymore because the Marine Corps is basically going to become a rocket, unit.
Yeah,
but
which is crazy too.
I know, and we can talk about that too. But like this whole thing with even though we're going to be replacing a lot with rockets, there is still going to be tube artillery in the Marine Corps. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna gap this part of my career.
Aren't they doing one battalion on each coast? Is what they're doing with the tube artillery or something like that?
So I don't know. That would make sense to me. But I think the reserves are going to go all rockets, and I think they only said there's going to be 5. I can't remember. I just lost
drastically. They're almost flip flopping HIMARS and tube coverage.
That's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah, and man, like, listen, our current commandant, I hold our current commandant in high regard. Mm-hmm. He's a smart guy, and I think he is forcing structural changes in the Marine Corps to fight the future, where people like you and I are still in love with the 9 or 8. So I get it. Like, we've got to move forward. We've got to progress. We can't fight the last battle and everything.
Yeah.
And I am confident that that these decisions, while are not popular in the tank community and the artillery community and some other communities, are probably going to be in our best interest for the next 50 years. Yeah. So with that said, I will also say this, man, I hope he's right. Yeah. Because if all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but if over time they figure out that was a bad idea and we actually need more tube artillery, you are going to decimate an institutional knowledge base of like 2 decades worth of people. Like your most senior guys will be master guns, and there will only be like 5 of them, and then they'll be like, you need to train everybody up in tube artillery. So you'll have to like create new section chiefs and create new like that's going to be that it'll take as long to unwind as it took to implement that decision. So if there's like a 2-decade gap, it's going to take 2 decades for the artillery community to get back into something like that. So same with the tank community, stuff like that, because those are, technical weapon systems. But yeah, that, that new 777, so we can come back to this, but like after my Anglo Code time, I got out and I went back to graduate school and I did some reserve time and I actually transitioned to be a tanker. And I did the tank community, did the LAR community, and then now I'm skipping, and we can come back to that, but when I became time to be eligible to be a battery commander, an artillery battery down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Mike Battery 314, had an opening for a battery commander, and it was an interesting time because Mike Battery was Mike Battery 414 before they rejiggered the battalions in the reserves, with their battalion headquarters or somewhere out of Alabama, I think. And so they consolidated that battalion, and that battery became part of 314. But they were one of the 2 firing batteries for Fallujah. So Mike Battery 414. And I know if you're an artilleryman, you have seen this picture of like the 777 firing. You can see the round coming out of it. It's a very famous picture. That's Mike Battery, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that's where they got their call sign, Pale Horse. And, so they went over there and they fired, and then they came back, and then they got activated for a deployment again. And they were going to go back again as a firing battalion. And right as they got tagged to go over as a firing battalion, the 777s came online. Now, again, this is before my battery command. I'm kind of setting the stage. So they trained up. They did like a transition training on the M777, and then were told they were going to go to Iraq as a firing battery. And then it switched over and they became provisional MP. So we've got all these Marines that spent all this time training up on the 777, and boom, they go over and they spend, let's just call it a year, right, with everything, workups and everything, off the gun. And then when they came back from that deployment was when the battery commander was leaving, and this slot was open up for me to take over. So I was, and in the previous podcast, I told you that because I got out, like I had some broken time. So my rank was all messed up. So my peer group was way older than I was. And it just so turned out that the battalion I&I, which in the reserves, and I could talk more about this, but in the reserves, there's a group of active duty people at every single reserve unit. They're called the instructor staff, or the I&I staff, and they're active duty, right? They're there Monday through Friday. And some of those billets, there are what are called integrated billets, meaning that like you may be the gunnery sergeant on the I&I staff, but then on reserve weekends, you're the battery gunny, or so they have these what are called integrated billets, like the FDC, the ops chief is the same thing. And so so the I&I staff at the battalion level, the I&I, who is the active duty lieutenant colonel, was a personal friend of mine. We went to Fort Sill together. And he called me up. His name's Glenn Gunther, and people in the artillery community, probably around my generation, definitely know his name. Glenn called me up and said, "Hey, Dave, I heard that you are not drilling right now, and I've got this slot opened up down in Chattanooga, Tennessee for a battery commander, and I'm wondering if you want it." And I was like, "No, dude, no." I just started up my own business, like, cause I was in the reserves, and I was actually at 4th Anglo Code at the time. And he said, "Hey, listen," he goes, here's what I got. He's like, "This unit is coming back from a deployment to Iraq. There were some leadership problems on the officer and the staff NCO side, and they are coming back, and they have to train back up on a brand new gun system. And the leadership that's there right now either isn't going to be there long enough, or I don't have enough trust and confidence in them to be able to transition them back over to a firing battery. Like, I need an artilleryman down there. You're perfect for this. Like, this is, you are bred for this." And I was like, so I start looking at the flights, and it's connecting flights through Atlanta and all this stuff. I'm like, I just don't want to do it. And then, so I told him no. I said, "Listen, it'll take me 2 days to get down there and back because of the flights and everything, and I'll end up laying over. It's going to be really hard for me to do. I can't do it. It's just too far away." And then he calls me back like a week later. He's like, "I just found out that once a day there's a direct flight out of Washington, D.C. to Chattanooga. every single day back and forth. So there goes that excuse. I was like, all right, fuck it, then I'll do it. So
Called you on
yeah,
it.
yeah. So but here are some interesting stories about Mike Battery 314. First of all, like I feel like every time, and maybe you had the same experience, but every time I left a unit, I left thinking like this was the best tour of that I ever had in the Marine Corps, right? With the exception of maybe my last tour at Headquarters Marine Corps in the Pentagon. I felt like that about every single, I was like, man, this is the greatest thing.
No,
So
I didn't
now
feel
that
like
it's
that.
all over, right? I can honestly say that my tour, well, all my tours are special, and I don't want to take anything away from anybody I ever worked with or the units that I ever worked with.
Yeah.
But personally, for me, my time at Mike Battery 14 has just engraved that unit into my soul forever. Like
Nice.
it was a fantastic unit. And, but I got down there and, the battery commander that they had before me was a great guy and did a great job, as their battery commander over in Iraq with provisional MP. But he was and I'm not maligning him. This is just this is just nature of the beast in the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
He was like a shake and bake artillery officer, which means like when he was on active duty, he was some other MOS. And then when he joined the reserves, they sent him to Fort Sill as a captain to learn how to become an artillery officer.
Yeah. Okay.
And then he became the battery commander. So he never did FDO. And that's fine. He did a great job. He did as good of a job in that as I did as a shake and bake tank officer. I mean, they sent me to school. I know we skipped that, but so coming back, he was giving up the battery, and I just kind of looked at this and I was like, okay, this unit has just had a CO for 2 years that had no lieutenant experience, right?
Yeah.
And was really at the mercy of what he was being told by everybody else, right? Which I think, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but like if you're a battery commander, right, or you're a commander of anything, or even staff into anything, like, and you're not listening to the advice of your Marines, you are going to fail, right?
Yeah.
But here's the other thing too. You can't rely 100% on their advice. You have to have your own institutional experience in order to say like, okay, you have two gunnies. One gunny's telling you A, one gunny's telling you B. You got to pick between A and B. You got that, right? So that's the way it works. So I get down there, and my friend Glenn had told me kind of like what I was walking into. He's like, hey, Dave, he's like, I'm just going to tell you right now, here are your big challenges walking in down there. He's like, all your officers suck. And all your staff NCOs pretty much suck. And I was like, hey, why didn't you tell me that, back when? So I was like, all right.
That's not what you want to hear when you're coming in the door.
It's not what you want to hear, but like, let me define the word suck.
Yeah.
Because at some point or another, every single one of us in our careers have sucked, right?
Oh, yeah.
So sucking was everything from like completely incompetent to and untrustworthy to and like caught lying or all this other bullshit. I mean, there's all kinds of stories about, staff NCOs pencil whipping their PFTs, but the Marines had to run it. Like that, there's all kinds of that bullshit. Like staff NCOs had air conditioning, but the Marines didn't over in Iraq. Like I heard all those kinds of stories, and I never investigated if they were true or not because it was all prior to me.
Yeah.
But so at some point or another, like we all kind of suck in our careers. And so there were the untrustworthy, unprofessional, just bad apples. And then there were the guys that had just been there too long. So in the reserves, what's interesting about the reserves is you can homestead a reserve unit as an enlisted Marine for 16 or 18 years.
Yeah.
Start out as a private and stay in that same unit for 16 years.
Which is crazy. Which is,
yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to think about from the perspective of somebody that, every 3 years you're going somewhere different.
Right. And it really shows you like why that's good and why that's bad. But like you get a gunny who's been in a unit for 16 years and you end up with, and this has nothing to do with an enlisted officer. This would be the same thing if an officer had been there for 16 years. You get the attitude of like, hey, I've been here for so long. I know how it goes. And, if it's not going my way, I'm going to sabotage it. Or you get that.
This is how we do things here.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I get that. That's a very natural human instinct. But it's also an indication of somebody that's just been around too long. And when somebody's around too long, you clog up the system at the top for the other guys to come up, right?
Yeah,
like
100%.
Because you're filling the building
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I walk in and nobody knew I was coming. Like they heard my name. They didn't know anything about me, right? And so I come walking into drill, and not that this means anything, but it's like a visual sort of like, who is this guy? All of a sudden, this major comes walking in, and he's got gold jump wings on, and people are like, who the fuck is this guy? Right? Like, they didn't know anything about my background. All they knew is they were getting a new commanding officer, and his name was Major Dave Armstrong. That's all they knew.
Yeah.
So there was this sort of like side eye that I was getting from a lot of people. And so I check in, and one of the interesting things was, after I just said this about the enlisted Marines staying there too long, the first sergeant that was going to become the first sergeant, so he had been selected for first sergeant but was still a gunny. He was one of those guys that had been in the unit for 16 years. And he was a forward observer. So he was 0861 the whole time, all the way up, and then got picked up for first sergeant. His name was David Bragg, one of the most phenomenal Marines I've ever worked with in my entire life. Gunny Bragg at the time. So I check in, and it just turns out that he not only had picked up first sergeant, but his assignment was Mike Battery 314. So now you've got this gunny that had been there forever is now going to be the first sergeant. So he knows all the institution. He knows everything about this unit, right? Thankfully, it was a positive thing. So I get down there on the drill weekend that we're going to change command. And I walk up to him and said, hey, Gunny, good to meet you. And there was a field exercise going on, and artillery guys know this term, but we were RSOPing, just moving the guns. Basically, it's when you just pick up the guns, you move to a firing position, you set in, and you do everything except load ammunition and shoot. And then you break it all down and you move to another. You're just practicing moving and setting up. It's called RSOPing. So they were RSOPing that drill, and my change of command was going to be the next day. So I'm kind of watching everything take place, and I'm just seeing stuff like, whoa, this makes me nervous. Holy shit. And the drill culminated that day with the artillery battery pulling out of the positions. And I don't know if this has been fixed on the M777 or not, but there's something about, like, if you don't hook up the brake lines right, it automatically engages the brakes on this thing. And but you can keep towing that howitzer, and the next thing you know, I'm watching this howitzer, the whole wheel is on fire because somebody didn't do. And this is just part of the thing about not being around the guns, right? Like being out of it for a year. I was like, okay, we're there, right? That's where we are with this battery. So I talked to the gunny. I'm like, hey, Gunny, good to meet you. I was like, so tell me what you think we're walking into. He's like, well, sir, it was a post of relief for him and a change of command for me. So we were coming in at the same day, at the same time. And I said, what do you think our first order of business is after the post relief and the change of command? He's like, sir, you need to fire all your fucking officers.
Well, there you go.
And I was like, okay. And I still didn't know him well enough. Now, my friend Glenn had told me, like, this guy was salt of the earth. He's like, he's your one. He's the guy that you need to go in there and lean on. Like, he's your partner in this thing. And he's a good guy. And I was like, all right, Gunny, well, let me tell you what I heard. I need to fire all the staff NCOs too. He goes, yes, sir, you need to do that too. He goes, I'll handle a lot of that. He goes, you're going to have to handle the officers. But, I'll talk to the staff NCOs, but then you're going to have to talk to them too.
Well, what was the major problem that you guys were seeing with them? What was the reasoning behind that?
There was a whole, so it was all the bad apples. There was all that drama that I don't have all the facts and details on, but it was the whole pencil whipping the PFT, the air conditioning thing, the Marines.
So it's just a bunch of little things that were like culminating and becoming like a toxic environment. It
was all that stuff. And then it was, hey, these guys were good guys. They just been there too long. And you had to, and so when I say firing, that's a big umbrella term. We had to move people out of the unit. Let me rephrase that, right? Like, not firing. Like, there were some people that needed to be shown the door. Get out. You are gone. You have to leave. The officers were easy because they had been there 2 years, and officers generally don't stick around somewhere for more than 2 years anyway. So I just lined them up at the door, and I was like, hey, where are you going to go next? That's how I just said it. Like, where are you going to go next? And the officers were all good people, but again, had been there for 2 years and contributed everything they were going to contribute to, or were getting ready for promotion and would have had to leave anyway.
Real quick, do officers switch every 2 years in the reserves as well? Or don't they? They can stay there, can't they? As long as they want. That's part of the problem.
But because at this point in the reserve system, they didn't have that program where they brought in brand new second lieutenants. So every officer in my unit had served 4 years on active duty somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And so they had that mindset of like, I've done this for 2 years. Now I'm going to go do this. And, officers kind of know that every 2 year, 2.5 year cycle. And they just, you're brought up in that cycle. So you get itchy anyway. So they were kind of easy. I just said like, hey, listen, what are you going to do next? And I'm in touch with a lot of these guys. They're good guys. It was just time for them to go. Staff NCOs were harder, right? So I remember this one gunny, the first sergeant came to me and said, you're going to need to talk to Gunny so-and-so. And I'm not even going to say his name, but you need to talk to Gunny so-and-so. And And so he comes in and I said, Gunny, tell me about yourself. He's like, well, I'm your this. I don't even want to say his billet because some of these guys are going to listen to this, but I'm the whatever. And I said, yeah, not anymore. So here's what's up. You've been doing that billet for X years. It's time for me to put some other people into that billet. I need you up and out. So you're going to check out. And here are your options. If you want to stay and drill at Mike Battery, you can be the Sacco. You can be the, whatever. Like they've got these, billets that have nothing to do with being in the firing battery, right? Yeah. And I was like, you can fill that role and come to drill and punch your clock and retire, do whatever you want to, but you are not going to be in my firing battery, right? And I said, or you can check out and there's ammo company down in Greenville. You can go there. There's a company up in Nashville. There's, there's places within a driving distance you can go to. And some of the people I got a lot of pushback from, like that one Gunny came in and I said, Gunny, tell me about yourself. He's like, well, sir, I've been in this unit for 18 years. I've held every billet from, PFC all the way up. And, officers, commanding officers come and go here every 2 years. And, I know I'll be here long after you leave. And just like every other officer that comes in here, you guys come in and you change things and then you leave. He's like, but I'm part of the glue around here. And, he's like, this is my battery.
Oh, well.
And he literally said that to me. And I was like, okay, I get what he probably meant by that. But
that's a ballsy thing to say to the new CO.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, you're out of here. So there were some people that I punched out. Right. And
that's crazy.
I was like, look, you can be the Sacco. You can be this, but I am not obligated to put you into a billet. So out. Bye.
So how often, real quick, how often do guys like actually change units in the reserves? Is it easy? Is it like, hey, I've been here for 5 years. I want to go to a different unit.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start drilling over here now. Is it a simple process? So
yes and no. And I'm a little bit removed from it. So if anybody listens to this and it's changed, post up in the comments or something. But when I was in, the deal was, let's just talk about an enlisted reserve Marine, right? So you're in high school and you join the reserves. Well, you're going to go to boot camp. You're going to do all of that stuff. And you're going to go to Fort Sill. And then you're going to come back to your life in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And you're going to start drilling 1 weekend a month, right? And 2 weeks in the summer. So you come back to your regular life. Let's just say you're a cop, right? So you got to take a year off to do all of this stuff. And then you come back and you either get a job or fall back into your job. And your life goes on. And 1 weekend a month, you get your hair cut, you put your uniform on, and you come on in. So those people, those Marines that join like that, I think joined under a program that basically said you need to drill for 4 years. Like you're an obligated Marine. You're obligated to drill for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then once you satisfy those 4 years, you are not obligated to drill on an every weekend, one weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer basis, but you're still in the IRR. So it's very similar to like when you get out on active duty. You join for 4, but you owe 8. And so that last 4, you may never get recalled off the IRR, but technically you're on it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. So you have your obligated Marines and then your non-obs or your non-obligated Marines. And non-obs are like people who have already done their 4 years, and think about them as like an at-will employee. They can quit anytime they want to, which is interesting from a leadership perspective, right? Because when I was on active duty, I could – hey, it's my way or not that I ever did this, but you had the power of somebody being enlisted and they're fucked, right? They're not going anywhere for 4 years.
Yeah, you're not quitting. There's no option to just go home.
That's right. And then when your 4 years comes up and you re-enlist for like 3 more years, you're part of the machine for 3 more years, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. You join a reserve unit. If you do 4 years on active duty on active duty in whatever, and then join a reserve unit, you can check in on a Saturday and decide on Sunday that you hate it and check the fuck out.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, you're going to tarnish your professional reputation, and you're going to make it very difficult to join a future reserve unit, right? Because the next reserve unit that you join is just going to call down to the previous reserve unit and say, and you're going to get fitness reports if you're, at that point anyway, probably. So you're going to get a little hammered on your fitness reports. So people are going to see this trend if you're a trend join and quit kind of guy, if you're not reliable. But the reality of it is you can just quit anytime you want to. Yeah. So the thing about Mike Battery that was interesting was like I had this leadership and then recruit and retain. Like on active duty, you never have a leadership function that inherently involves retention. Like if I had a really great gun chief, I had an incentive to make sure that he came to the next drill weekend, right? So all of a sudden, as an officer, as a leader, as a staff NCO or an officer, you need to make sure that I'm going to boil this down. Like if the guys think the unit sucks and they're not having any fun, they're gone. They're just they're going to check out. So interesting twist into leadership, and makes your leadership in the reserves a little bit more like your leadership in the civilian world, right? Because in my company or any company that you work for, I mean, my employees can quit anytime they want to. So there was this aspect of like, hey, I'm going to ultimately be judged not only on my ability as a battery commander to lead this, but on my like if guys start quitting in droves, my battalion commander's gonna be like, what are you doing down there? Right?
Yeah.
It's almost like its own command climate survey, except there's no survey. They just pack up and leave.
That's a weird environment. That's a hard concept for active duty guys. I think people that have only done active duty time to understand or never worked with reserves. And that probably explains a lot of the interesting attitudes sometimes I guess you run into with reservists. I deployed with reserve. It was a reservist, like mechanics and stuff like that, but completely different people, than your active duty counterparts, and not only in their capabilities, because 1 week in a month, 2 weeks of the year, a lot of that time spent doing annual training and not actually doing your job, and then it's just a weird. The relationship junior Marines have with NCOs and stuff is weird. It's not as strict as active duty, like stand at parade rest when you're talking to a corporal, address them as corporal, stuff like that. Like it's just a different environment. So yeah, I could see how that for you coming, from active duty as an officer to that, and trying to figure out how, best to run that system. It's got to be an interesting concept, and I'd like you to expand on it more. But real quick, what is it like for an officer to like, hey, I'm coming to this unit to become the battery commander. Like, what's it like for you to walk up that first day, and like knowing like, okay, I'm coming in to be in charge, and everyone, like you said, everyone's giving you the side. Everyone's like, oh, this is the new guy.
Who's the new guy? Yeah.
If he's wearing his uniform, if you're wearing chucks, it's like, oh, where's he been? What's he done? I'm looking at his resume on his chest real quick, like, and it's definitely a, for us on the enlisted side, you're definitely looking at these people like, how's this dude going to fuck my life up? Or is he going to be a good dude?
Yeah. I'm in the middle of that story too, because it gets worse, right? This whole like checking everybody out.
Yeah.
Let me pause there, and remind everybody, like, when I came off of active duty and went back to graduate school, I immediately joined the reserves, and the reserve unit where I was going to graduate school was a tank unit. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, hey, I'm a captain. I've got 2 years in time and grade. I've fired, Anglico. I spent all this time as the liaison officer to a tank battalion. Like, I get the tank community. I want to join. And the tank community at the time was the only one that, like, you were not allowed to get in that tank unless you became an 1802. Like, you had to go to school to become an 1802, right? So I was like, well, how hard could it be? I mean, it's the same thing as a cannon. It's just shooting line of sight. I mean, it's right? I don't even need to break out a TFT. I get, what are you talking about? Point of aim is point of impact. Like, it's not that hard. So I got off of active duty and then immediately went to Fort Knox for a year. Yep. And so I became an 1802, a tank officer. And then because they didn't have anything for me to do and they had the funds to do it, I stayed at Fort Knox for another 6 months. I went to the career course. It was called the Armor Officer Advanced Course, but it's like the captain's career course now. For any officers out there know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like the advanced course you go to before you come back for your command time. Mm-hmm. So I did all that and then went to graduate school, and I was doing the 1 week in a month and 2 weeks in the summer in this tank unit, and I hated it, man. And this is the warning that I'll give any listeners that are thinking about doing this, is like, you are going to have a very difficult time if you're a professional, like you really love being a Marine and you want to stay in the reserves, and you go from you check out of your active duty unit on like, let's just use Anglico as an example, right? You check out of 1st Anglico on July 1st and you check into 4th Anglico on August 1st, you've got a rude awakening coming, because it's a different environment, and you're going to come in there all gung-ho, like, why aren't we doing this and why aren't we doing that? And that was a very difficult adjustment for me. And it was so difficult, in fact, that I quit. Like, I was one of the guys that was like, I'm non-ob, I'm out of here. I called my battalion commander, and the final straw was the battalion commander was like, we're doing an off schedule AT because we're going to go out with 1st Tank Battalion. So our AT is going to be September 15th through, and I was like, that's right in the middle of graduate school. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And he was like, you either do it or get the fuck out of my battalion. I was like, bye-bye, sir. Later.
Thanks for the ultimatum, bro.
Right. Well, yeah. Right. And this is the whole retention thing. And that was my first lesson in like, look, you want to be a dick? I don't have to play anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And the enlisted Marines are the same way. So like, that was my first experience in like, hey, here's how bad leadership is going to cause a retention problem, because you know what? I was probably one of the best officers they had in that tank unit. And I was just like, I'm out of here. You just spent a whole year on making me a tanker, and I drilled for a year and I'm gone. Right. I did 1 AT and I'm out. So, so by the time, now to your question about like, what's it like to come in? I had 7 years of broken time. And then when I came back in, I joined the LAR company down in Quantico, Virginia, because I was in 1802. And at the time they would let a tanker be an LAR guy. So here comes this artillery guy that had been to tank school, is now joining the LAR company. And that was really fun. But that's where I kind of got back into the swing of the reserves. Like I really enjoyed going on drill weekends, and all of our equipment was working. And those guys had just come off the march up. And, you know, we were out there training, and we could go drive those things around all the time. You could put them on the highway and just drive them down the road 65 miles an hour. We'd just drive down to Fort APL.
LAVs are probably the best ride I've ever been in. Like, really? It's so comfortable. You don't feel potholes. Like, the only thing that's sketchy about it is the PFC that's driving it may roll it over, because it's very easy to roll over. Outside of that,
that's true, right?
Standing up in the back and just cruising down the street is super cool.
Yeah, we would drive down. So again, I'm still back on my LAR time, but so when I came back in reserves, they made me a platoon commander as a captain. So I loved it. It was great, right? I got my 4 vehicles and my guys, and they were all good. But one of the interesting things was like one of my sergeants was it obviously an enlisted Marine, but was a lawyer. So he had enlisted, gone to college, gone to law school. I was like on the partner track at a huge law firm in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, these are the kind of people you get in reserve units. Like you get some guy, like, and you have to remember the thing about the reserves, like everybody there has a job in the real world. So I never ran. I ran 1 office hours, and it was because one Marine stole gear from another Marine, right? And that's, he's got it. But like I never, like UAs, unheard of. Late to formation with no phone call, because that would happen. Hey, my car broke down. I'll be there in 60 minutes, that kind of thing. But like everybody was there all the time, ready to work. 4:30 in the morning. It's just right. There's no barracks bullshit. Because we would stay in a hotel. You come down for drill weekend, you get put up in a hotel. There's no guys tearing mattresses up and setting them on fire and throwing them off the second deck and like, you know, running around with 12-pack boxes on their head. Like these guys are like, man, I'm tired. I just worked all week and I got to get up at 4:30 in the morning.
Where was that unit based out of?
Chattanooga, Tennessee, Mike Battery, or
no. I meant the LAR.
Oh, Quantico, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Out of Camp Upshur, right at the very backside of Quantico.
Yeah. Man, you've been all over, dude. Tanks,
I know,
LAR, Arty, Anglico. Like you've gotten to do a lot. Before we move on though, Chattanooga, what a great place, right? I grew up there.
I know, yes,
Hickson,
and you know exactly where that unit is too.
Yeah.
And you know the thing about that unit, I know you and I have talked about this over email, but that was the unit that in 2015 had the 4 Marines and a sailor killed down there with a domestic terrorist attack, where the guy went to the recruiting center first and like shot a whole bunch of bullets through the reserve center, through the recruiting center, and then drove to the reserve center and like smashed through the vehicle fence that closed, and just started, there were Marines there. It was during the week. So the I&I staff was there. There were a couple of reserve Marines there, like just making up drills that they had missed. Yeah. And, four of those guys and a Navy guy were killed. Really sad. And I remember I had just given up command. It had been 2 years since I had command down there, but I still knew everybody down there.
Yeah.
I knew the I&I, the captain, the gunny, everybody. And, so like the active duty I&I ops chief was killed. And the I&I motor T guy was killed, and then a couple of other reservists that were just there making up drills. But I was at work and I had a TV on, and they cut away to the news, and the helicopter was showing, and I'm like, that's my reserve center. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I thought it was just a recruiting station. I didn't realize until you had mentioned it before that a reserve center was involved in it as well. That's
Right.
that's
Actually,
wild.
nobody was not that this means anything. Nobody was killed. They shot, but I think that like the glass stopped most of the rounds at the reserve center. Like maybe they had some already like force protection glass put in there or whatever. But like the reserve center, this guy just battering ran right through the fence and of course nobody's got their weapons
Yeah.
But the story has it that one of the Marines had a weapon in his car and they ran over and grabbed it and they started fighting back and undoubtedly saved people's lives. Yeah, but somebody like pulled an illegal, you're not supposed to have your weapon. Well, like,
That's Tennessee. Let's
I know,
not
right?
pretend like people aren't driving around with guns in their cars.
Yeah. But so when I came to Mike Barry, you asked me the question about what's it like to show up. I had already been re-indoctrinated back into the reserves. So I had completely cooled off, right? Like I knew the drill. I knew the game. I don't call it a game, but like I knew the sequence. I knew the rhythm of where a reserve unit should operate, right? And I knew the sources of frustration that came along with people homesteading at a unit and just being around too long. And I also knew, and you know this too, like Marines will always rise to the occasion if you give them the chance, right? And I knew that. So I walked in there thinking like, okay, I was basically asked to take this unit over. I've got my friend at the battalion who's kind of flying high cover for me. Now, he was not my boss. I had a reserve battalion commander, which was kind of interesting because I think with my broken time, I think he was actually a second lieutenant when I was a captain. So he made my life miserable, right?
Yeah, right.
But my reserve headquarters was up in Philadelphia. So we called ourselves Mike Battalion because like our culture was just so bigger than life, like, and we were so far away from the flagpole. We were just kind of our own thing hanging out down there. And but so I kind of knew where the ass pain was in the reserves. And I also knew that I had that honeymoon period where I could kind of get away with a reset if I did it fast enough, right? And because it's a reserve unit, like that reset is like almost a quarter. It's 3 drills, so it's like a quarter of a year. No one was going to come down and really say like, "What are you doing? What are you out of your mind?" That was going to take 3 months for somebody to figure out.
Yeah.
So that's when I told you I lined everybody up, and by the end of that drill, it was the first sergeant and I. Every single reserve officer was gone. Every single staff NCO, with the exception of one staff sergeant, was gone. Checked out, done, right? So now, and in an artillery battalion, you've got the headquarters battery, which is like everybody, and then you've got the guns platoon, or headquarters platoon, and then the guns platoon is everybody that's on the gun line. This is gonna, like, people are not gonna believe this. I swear to God, this is true. By the end of that drill, the senior Marine in guns platoon was a corporal.
Really?
That was
you didn't
it.
have it? No. Oh, well, I guess you said you released all your staff NCOs or pushed
Everybody,
them out.
yeah. Now I couldn't get rid of the I&I, so I still had a battery gunny.
Yeah.
Right. But like on the reserve side, all those people were gone. So like think back to an artillery battery where your platoon commander is a corporal.
Yeah, that's
right.
pretty wild.
I mean, like, right.
Corporal is not even a senior guy in a gun.
No,
I don't even. Are corporals even allowed to become gun chiefs?
I got a waiver or something because that's all I had.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I guess when you have to.
Yeah. And so when you were talking about like what's it like to walk in there, I just knew that I had a very small window before anybody started judging me to come in there and be like, this is the way it's going to be. Yeah. Right. And I knew, and I had the fact that the first sergeant told me that all needed to get done meant that I wasn't going to have any sergeant major pain. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I had that side covered. It was my battalion commander that I was worried about because true to my kind of like my personality, I mean, I have never not gotten in trouble at any rank I've ever had. I mean, I've always caused waves at some point or another, like I'm pissing somebody off, and it's usually up the chain of command. Yeah. And so I just knew that my battalion commander was going to be on the phone with me by the end of the drill weekend. Like I was going to be having a conversation with him. And so I walked out to the gun park, and I already knew who the senior Marine was in the guns platoon, but I asked the question anyway. I was like, hey, I need all the NCOs over here. There was 9 of them, 9 corporals in guns platoon. I said, which one of you is the senior Marine? This guy, Chris McDonald, puts his hand up. He's like, I am, sir. I'm like, well, I said, I just got rid of every single person in guns platoon. You're the senior Marine in guns platoon now. And they all just looked at me like I had a dick coming out of the middle.
Like, what?
Like, right?
Bobby?
And I was like, Corporal McDonald, you're in charge. You're in charge of guns platoon. What do you have to do before we have to secure for today? Well, sir, we're going to finish up cleaning the guns. I was like, great. Well, you're in charge of making sure they're all clean, and the battery gunny will come out and inspect, and it's on you to make sure all of this is, clean. And then I look at the rest of the corporals and I say, hey, listen, I know this is going to sound a little like officer-ish, but just listen to me for a second. Like, I know that there's nothing harder in the world to do than lead your own peers who are the same rank. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, I had to do it at TBS. I know how hard it is to get, 45 lieutenants to do the same thing when you don't really have the power of rank.
Yeah.
And I said, you guys are kind of getting what you always wished you had, which is I would do things differently if I was in charge, or once I'm in charge. I'm like, well, you guys are in charge now. So everything that this platoon does and fails to do is on your guys' head. Like,
putting the Lost Boys in charge.
Yeah. And they loved it, man. It was like, I just re-energized the whole guns platoon. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting to the conclusion of the story, but I was coming out of the head. So in order to get that flight, I had to leave the drill. And this is one of the things I worked out in order to do this. I was like, hey, listen, in order to be back to work on time, I've got to catch that 4:30 flight out on Sunday afternoon. So I may have to turn the battery over to the XO to secure them. And so that's what had to happen. And everybody knew I had to leave because I only had one flight out of there. And so I was getting ready to leave, and I was walking down this passageway, and there was Marines, like working party, like mopping the thing, but they were around this corner, so I could hear them talking, but they didn't know I was coming, right? Which is the classic officer sneak up and hear what the Marines are talking about. Like, it's such a leadership thing that you guys don't know that we do. Like, you just you listen a lot more than you think we do. And I hear these two Marines, and they're PFC's Lance Corporals, right, because they're swabbing the deck. And I heard this one say, like, what is the new CO's name? What is his name again? He's like, I don't know. He's like, but I don't know where he came from either, because he's got those wings. Like, is he a pilot? Like, they didn't even know what I was. And he goes, all I know is I heard he fired every single staff NCO in the battery, right? And the guy was like, are you kidding? Who's going to be our platoon sergeant now? Like, they're talking like this. And I just come whipping around the corner, right? I'm like, hey, gents, how's it going? So like, oh, hey, sir. Like, I scared the shit out of him, right? But when I heard that, I kind of knew that the signal that not that I was trying to send the signal, but the new signal was like, hey, there's a new CO here, and he ain't fucking around.
Yeah.
So
what a weird position, because you don't want to over I don't know, you don't want to become a burden on your dudes. You know what I'm saying? Like, as a leader, like, you're trying to enable them to be able to do their job as quickly, as safely, as professionally as possible, without like stepping on their toes, micromanaging, making bad decisions, in a vacuum or something like that. It's I don't know. It's such a weird, it's a weird position to put yourself in, and then having to fire like all of your leadership people, or, we say fired, but, reposition them into other places. Mm-hmm. And then having your corporals in charge. And, I think it's really interesting, and anybody that's been in for anybody that became an NCO can tell you that what you're talking about, having to lead your own peers, is definitely there's issues with it, because like you said, you're all the same rank. So you don't have that like, well, I'm a sergeant, so you have to listen to me, kind of deal, which you don't really want that anyway. Like, you want it to be like, hey man, this is what we're doing. And this is, like, people just do it because they understand that you're not an idiot, or that you're looking out for their best interest. It always sucks. So I got to 10th Marines, and I was a sergeant, and I didn't know anything. And I've said it multiple times on here before, where, I was a motor T guy. Sergeant DeLaura showed me how to plot on a map. I didn't even know how to, like, protractor. Oh, cool. That's cool. Oh, we get markers too. Like, hey, like, I don't know any of this shit, because I was a motor T mechanic at maintenance battalion. My job was to come in and turn wrenches.
Yeah.
And as I, after a few months, and, I was at 210 for 9 months before I went to MOS school. And that's 9 months of field ops and stuff like that. I mean, one time, Master Sergeant Klein, he was in some course, he was gone, and then my major was gone, or we had a field op, and then he had to leave for a little bit. So he's like, Kramer, you're the fires chief for the next like 4 hours. And I'm like, dude, I haven't even been to MOS school yet, and I'm like, fuck. So, but what I'm getting at is, like, going there and not having any knowledge. And then I started learning stuff, and I'm figuring it out, and they would put me in charge of stuff. And then I had other sergeants that came in after me that were also lap movers. Some of them had gone to school already, and some of them had not. And I remember one guy, like, he would always hang out with the junior Marines. Like, he lived in the barracks with them, and he would go out to eat with them, and he would go do stuff with them. And then, like, when we were at the shop, he'd be in there, like, hanging out with them. And then me and DeLaura would be over here, like, working. And, Gunny would come in and be like, hey, we got to take care of this stuff. Make sure it gets done, like, good to go or whatever. And I'd be like, hey, guys, we have to do this. And the other sergeant would be like, hey, guys, Sergeant Kramer says we have to do this, so let's do it. And it's like, bro, you're not supposed to be, like, with them. You're supposed to be over here hanging out with me and the other sergeants. Like, you're hanging out with the junior Marines and, like, making it like, I don't know, excuse the noise first off. If you keep hearing noise, right before we started recording, I saw a tractor or a trailer pull up and offload a Bobcat. And I'm like, God damn it.
Oh, I haven't heard a thing.
Okay, so if you do hear some banging, there's some construction going on outside on the street. Anyway, but telling like, hey, dude, I need you to take care of this. And then like, pushing it, I don't know. It's just, it's a weird thing that sometimes you have to do. And when you first get promoted to corporal or you first get promoted to sergeant, a lot of the times senior NCOs or staff NCOs will be like, all right, man, you're in charge of this, just to see if you can, lead your other dudes. And it's a fine line that you have to walk because, you're still friends with these guys. And a lot of these guys are living in the barracks with them. So it's not like Staff Sergeant Kramer where, hey, do this, and then like everyone's pissed off at me, and then like, oh, too bad, I'm going home. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I go home to my house. And they go to the barracks. Like you're living with them in the barracks and hanging out with them, and I don't know. I just thought that's
in the reserves. Those guys aren't living together.
Yeah. That's different. That's different for sure.
But I also said to them too. I was like, I remember talking to the corporals because here's another interesting thing, and this doesn't make the reserves better or worse than the active duty. It's just different, right? It's never going to be the same thing.
No,
it's not designed to be, right? But here's the one thing about the reserves that's really interesting is like those corporals are mature people, right? Like they are sergeants on the police force, they are EMTs, they are in graduate school, they're like they have lives outside of all of this. So they actually want to be there and they like it. They like reserve weekend for the most part.
And they get to bring a different perspective to the whole thing.
Incredible. I mean, like the stuff that these people knew how to do was mind blowing. But I grabbed all those corporals one time and I said, hey, listen, like Sergeant, he became meritoriously promoted to sergeant. Like I got him on the next board and I was like, hey, this is really important. So he became a sergeant pretty quickly, meritoriously, which is awesome. And I said to the corporals, I was like, listen, your buddy, Chris, you're one of you 9 corporals is in charge now. And his success or his failure is 100% on your shoulders. Like if he fails in this role that he is unqualified for, it's your fault. Because you're not supporting him as a leader. So his success is on you guys collectively as a group of NCOs. Right? Yeah. And that's how I'm looking at it. And here's the other thing too. Like if he fails, who's the next guy in the breach? One of you. So stand the fuck by. I think
that's a good way to like, as a leader, as an officer coming in and telling them that. I think that's a smart thing to do because that's another thing is a lot of guys will become a corporal or a sergeant or whatever and go in to do something and their buddies are naturally going to give them a hard time about it. Like, nah, or like kind of push it off. And it's like, dude, it's like, you're fucking me, man. Like if we're friends, like what are you doing? Like, why are you trying to fuck me right now?
That's
like,
right.
These are the things that people have you do. And it's funny as a corporal, it's like sometimes junior Marines think corporals are making major decisions. Like they're the ones that want you to be out there field daying or, whatever you're doing, police calling or whatever it is that the corporal's in charge of you doing or running a range, it's other people are telling the corporal what, so it's like if you're giving him a hard time, you're giving him a hard time for no reason. Cause it's not like he really made the decision anyway. He's just a working supervisor that's there to make sure that the job is done correctly. So it's, everybody takes their own path as they get promoted into these leadership positions. And it's interesting to see how some people embrace it, becoming a leader and trying to pass on the knowledge or whatever that they have. And some people don't. Some people do not like being in leadership positions and don't want to be in charge of like anything. They just want to be the dude that's just there to do his job. And, and at some point,
right? I mean,
to a point, but I think we get a lot of those people that get promoted to staff NCOs and stuff like that. And then you find out that they're just not any good. They're not good at being leaders, or they may not be good at their job or something like that. And now it's like, I don't know. As an institution, I think we have a hard time telling people that they suck, and that's why
and it's not a merit-based system. It's a
No.
time-based system. If you got this much time and grade, you're eligible for promotion, and as long as you didn't get a double-assigned fitness sport, you're going to get promoted.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah,
it tracks
to
all
a
the way
point.
back to like accurate job performance, right? Assessment, and a non-merit-based. And this is where I actually think that the Marine Corps, like we all got JJ did tie buckle, right? We got that. We drilled into that, whatever. There's so much more to it leading people regardless of rank. Take the officer staff and say, like, if there's two people standing together, somebody's leading, right? It goes all the way down to that level. And so we miss so much in the Marine Corps about how to effectively lead people because we just rely on this and the UCMJ, and there's no like merit-based pay. There's no incentive to perform at a higher level, because you're going to get promoted as the same. It's like one guy sits on his ass and one guy's doing all the work. You're going to get promoted at the same time.
No, exactly.
But what you start to realize about leadership, and again, this doesn't have anything to do with officer, staff, NCO. This is just how it works. There's so much more to it than JJ did tie buckle. Like, you've got to inspire these guys and gals. I should say, like, you need to inspire your Marines, right? And you need to have some empathy about their personal situations. And you need to understand that, like, hey, I love to use this as an example, and I don't even know if it happens anymore, but like, if I was a battalion commander out in the fleet, I would cease immediately Thursday night field days. Stop. Done. It's over. I don't care. We're not doing it in my battalion. Because that's where these people live. Like, and you're making them pull their like, are you doing that at home? Are you and your wife pulling every piece of furniture out of your house and dusting and everything at home? Fuck no, you're not doing that. Like, so like, we miss empathy, we miss compassion, we miss inspiration. And boy, I really hope I don't get slaughtered by any Marines from Mike Battery for saying this, but I feel like I could have led that unit in my PT gear. I didn't need rank to lead that unit. Yeah. All I needed to do was set a mission and give the Marines what my expectations were and just supervise them doing it and set the conditions for their success. And if as a leader, if you just set the conditions for somebody's success, they will rise to the occasion, or somebody will, right? Yeah. And you may have to get rid of some people, but like that battery, I get back to telling you like how it just seared itself into my soul. Like the next drill weekend that we were supposed to go out was a firing drill weekend. So the next weekend we were going, and this is another thing that people just don't understand about the reserves. Like, we do things in a drill weekend that takes an active duty battery a month to do, right? Yeah. So like, here was a typical drill weekend where Mike Battery was going to fire the howitzers. We would come in on Thursday night, and I won't get into all the mechanics of this, but like one weekend a month is sort of like the guide. You have X amount of days that you can drill. So if you want to have a 3-day drill weekend, you could drill Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's just the next weekend you can only drill a Saturday. Like, you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. So you kind of put the Tetris thing together to make your training plan so that when you go to the field, you're going out for 3 days. Coming on a Thursday night, wake up, formation at 4 o'clock in the morning. So Thursday night was spent prepping all the gear. Like the convoy is all lined up, just like a standard, like you're going to the field. Everything's staged the night before. Come in, formation, draw your weapons, get on the vehicles, and we start our road march up to Fort Campbell, Kentucky at, let's just call it 7 o'clock in the morning, right? Well, that's a 5-hour road march up through Nashville. So I've got 28 pieces of rolling stock. The Marines aren't riding in the tactical vehicles. I mean, there's a driver, but everybody's on a bus for the most part, right? So get on the bus, have your weapon, your personal gear is all loaded into the trucks, and there's a 28 vehicle convoy driving 5 hours. 5 hours. Like, we had to stop at like this truck stop. We set up a refuel point. Like, I convinced the battalion to send me a refueler so I could do this. 5 hours up, we'd get to Fort Campbell on Friday afternoon. We would advance party the ammo trucks so they could go up there, because drawing ammos, there's a lot of ass pain with that, especially on an Army base. So they're up there drawing ammo. We get up there and we would set into our first firing position on Friday afternoon in the daylight, wait on the ammo, and then start shooting on Saturday morning. And you'd shoot all day Saturday morning, and then Saturday evening, Saturday night, you would cease shooting, drive over to the wash ramps, sleep on the wash ramps, wake up on Sunday morning at, 0 dark, start washing the vehicles down, at the wash ramps. We were back road marching back by 10 o'clock in the morning, back late afternoon, put the stuff away. We're securing around 6 o'clock. That's like a drill weekend when you go shoot, right?
That's crazy. You only have one day to shoot.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many rounds would you normally take out for a field op, for like a weekend field op like that?
Yeah, that's a good story. Usually like 100 or 200 rounds.
Okay.
Right.
So it's not too bad.
And with guys having to because in the reserves, you can have a conflict. If you clear it with the battery leadership, be like, hey, I've got an exam this weekend or something like that. So you're always operating around 75 or 80%. So like maybe you're only bringing 3 or 4 guns out. Right. Okay. So that kind of thing. So gun crews for the most part stayed homogenous, but there was always cats and dogs moving around and stuff like that. But I mean, like, think about all of the ORM and all of the stuff that would go into an active duty battery saying, okay, we're gonna drive from Camp Pendleton up to 29 Palms, set into a firing position. We're going to shoot all day, and we're going to turn around and come back the next day.
Yeah,
like
you would never
do that. No one on active
that.
duty would ever let you do that.
No, they'd be like, that's such a waste of time, money, resources. I get it for the reserves. The only time we would ever do a movement like what you're talking about is when I was at 10th Marines, and we would go to Bragg twice a year.
Yeah,
and the shit show of that, having an entire regiment of artillery pieces and rolling stock rolling down the highway and trying to hope to God that some of them don't break down. You're like, God, I hope my truck makes it all the way to Bragg.
Yeah, it's like a trail of tears of broken military equipment down the whole highway.
For sure, there's a rest stop that they'd always stop at and refuel. And that's the first, like, all right, how many vehicles did we lose? And you start getting the numbers for how many vehicles have turned around or whatever.
But we never did. So like all that stuff gets thrown out the window, right? Yeah. So like ORM, all of that stuff, it's a boilerplate bullshit document. Nobody reads it because it's the same thing over and over again. And this is what it is. It is, hey, we're getting from point A to point B, and if something fucks up in the middle of it, figure it out. Yeah. That's it.
We like to overcomplicate.
There's your 5-paragraph order, right?
Did you guys ever have Oh, go ahead.
And so like, if something broke down, well, we broke the tow bars out and we hauled it up,
for
hauled
cover.
it back, and we, Humvees will break down or whatever it is. But so my very first drill weekend, I did all that happen where I rejiggered the battery, reset the battery with its personnel, and then my battalion commander calls me and goes, "Hey, I just heard from the sergeant major that you basically every single one of your officers is gone and every single one of your staff NCOs is gone." I said, "No, sir. First sergeant's still here," and I kept Staff Sergeant Spiel, who's the communications sergeant, staff sergeant. And I've got the I&I staff, right? So I've got gunny this, gunny that. Okay, so, and those guys didn't work for me, except on a drill weekend, they did work for me. So they were the active duty guys that followed. So like this guy named Hackney was my battery gunny. Brian Marsloff was my ops chief.
I know that name, Hackney. I feel like I might have worked with him before.
Yeah, he was like a classic old battery gunny kind of guy. Been around the community for a long time, like trustworthy, salt of the earth. Was very helpful to me as a battery commander. Like one of those guys, he was a collaborator, which I loved. Yeah. I love the collaborators. And then there was the captain who was the I&I captain, right? So I did have one officer there besides me. And, like there's rules about artillery, like you have to have so many officers, position safety officer and all that stuff. So he's like, well, how do you think you're going to go out to the field and shoot next drill weekend, Major Armstrong? I was like, well, sir, I mean, I've got Chuck Boyd. He was the I&I, and he and I get along really well. And he was a captain, I was a major, but we had to run this thing together, right? We had to work together in this. And I was like, I already asked Chuck if he'd be the FDO. He said no problem. He hasn't done an FDO in a long time, but it would be great. And I checked with the ops chief Marsloff, and like we're covered from a regimental safety SOP. Like I've got everything covered, as long as Lieutenant Colonel Gunther will let his I&I captain, he's safety qualified, be the FDO, we have no problem. We're going to shoot. Mm-hmm. He's like, I hope to God you know what you're doing. And I was like, I do, sir.
Like, that's awesome that you had the leeway to do that, though, that you didn't have to like get permission to, move your staff out. That's pretty wild.
Well, I think that's what I was getting back to before. Like, I think I was given such latitude because the battery was so messed up with this reset and the provisional MP and then coming back off a deployment where things didn't go all that well. And I just think that they were like, hey, whatever we need to do to get this back to an artillery unit, right?
Yeah.
And I also had the luxury of my friend Glenn, Lieutenant Colonel Gunther, saying like, hey, give Dave a chance. I know this guy personally. Like if he has a plan, and then he's called me up, he's like, you have a plan, right? But so the next drill weekend, we went out and executed that whole drill plan that I was saying about. We went up to Fort Campbell, and I told the ops chief and the battery gunny, and because the first sergeant just sidekick with me, so the ops chief and the battery gunny, like they're the ones that are driving the train out in the field. Those two guys, and I said, listen, I said, when was the last time we ever came out to that you guys know of? And Bragg was there, my first sergeant, so he'd been there for 16 years, so he knew the answer to this question. When was the last time we ever came into a gun position on Friday night and shot on Friday night before Saturday morning? And First Sergeant Bragg was like, we've never done it in history. Like, we're doing it this time. That's it. We are going to fire artillery on Friday night.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's what I kind of figured you were going to get at, like before that you would come in on Friday and shoot. When you said you'd wait till Saturday to shoot, I was kind of surprised. Normally you would think you'd at least put out your check rounds and stuff like that, those initial rounds, just to make sure like, all right, everything's good. We can for real start first thing in the morning.
And so that's where this whole thing, like you just get this reserve culture that creeps in, like, okay, why don't we just wait until Saturday morning to shoot our check rounds so we're like, we can double check everything in the daylight. And I'm like, there's no double checking everything in the daylight. Either the howitzers are laid correctly and the data coming out of the AFATIDs is correct, or it's not. It has nothing to do with the sun being up or down, right?
Yeah.
They're like, well, how about, observing the rounds? I'm like, shoot a fucking WP round and get the guys on the hill that put their MVGs on. Like, what is this about an observed round? Like, look, guys, either the data is right or it is not. And if it is not, I am not going to allow us to go hot. But there's no reason that we just wait until the daylight comes. That's just dumb. Yeah. And so Brian Marsloff, Gunny Marsloff, like I could tell hours of stories about him. He and I together. He had just before this I&I unit, he had just come off of, I think it was some battalion in 6th Marines, and I want to say it was 3-6. I could be wrong on that, but whoever then Lieutenant Colonel Christmas, the younger, had as an infantry battalion in Afghanistan. It
was 3-6.
Okay, so Brian, like in every artillery infantry battalion, there's one 0848 artillery operations chief who runs the 81 millimeter mortar section.
Yep.
Right. Okay. That was Brian Marsloff. So he came off that deployment and over to the I&I staff, like basically right out of a combat zone. So, and his personality is, he's redlining all the time anyway. Right.
Yeah.
And so here's this redlined gunny who I did not get along with at all. And he did not like me at all. Like we were bumping heads, mostly because I think he was going through this cool off period. Like he needed to cool off a little bit, and I was pressing up. Right, so we were banging into each other a little bit. If he came straight from that 3-6 deployment, that was during the push through Marja.
That 3-6 did. So that was that was a pretty active deployment for those guys too.
It was. Yeah, that was a very kinetic deployment for him. And I think he saw some things, and we never talked about that stuff other than he said he would just tell me it was a tough deployment. But so anyway, I said to Marsloff, I'm like, we're going to shoot. And I said, listen, this is you're essentially he's the FDC chief. I'm like, listen, you tell me that it's not safe to shoot and we won't do it. But my guidance is shoot. And like Marsloff was like, fuck yeah. We're going to shoot. We're going to shoot. And as soon as those guys were like, we're going to do this, like it just happened. And it's like, I don't know, it was like 10:30 at night, but man, we shot our check rounds. The hill observed them. I was like, all right, everybody get in the rack. It's been a long day, Yeah. And so we went out there with a corporal as the guns platoon sergeant commander, basically. But I had Hackney there. Like we were making sure that everything was safe. But like all of a sudden, these guys figured out like, hey, we can do this.
Yeah.
Like this is, and so I always like, here was the thing I always told my battery, and I'll tell anybody that goes into the reserve into a reserve unit at any rank, doesn't matter, right? If you can go into a reserve weekend having everybody scared shitless about what you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then leave on a Sunday thinking, oh, I knew we could always do it. That is a complete success. That is a successful drill weekend. Like if you go into the drill weekend saying like, oh, we're going to set up in the gun position and we're not going to fire until Saturday morning, you're not challenging anybody, right?
So yeah, you got to make people uncomfortable every once in a while.
Right. And so in the artillery community, when you get an officer who's a little bit more like pushing the envelope, you make everybody's assholes just pucker right up.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when you're shooting on an army base that's as restrictive as Fort Campbell is. So things started to really start to go really well with Mike Battery. And we really started to click as a unit. And our goal was, by the time we go out on RAT 1 year after my command, so at my we were going to go to Rolling Thunder, and we were falling in with 10th Marines.
Oh, okay.
And so our whole battalion we were going out there and we were shooting with 10th Marines. And I was like, Mike Battery will be the Top Gun battery at Rolling Thunder. Period. End of story. That is my expectation. That's what we will do. We're going to go up again.
You want to explain what a Top Gun battery is for those that may not know?
So they have a competition where they shoot, and they have a surveyed point out in the middle of the impact area, and they get observers up on the hill with like aiming circles so they can dial in, exactly. They can triangulate exactly where your round lands, and you get one round, one set of data, one chance to hit that target, and whoever comes closest is essentially crowned Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
So. But here's the other thing too, like, you're not going to get Top Gun if you just spend 2 weeks fucking up all over the place. Like, nobody up on the hill is going to say like, oh yeah, let's give, XYZ battery who just, I don't know, did something stupid.
Yeah. We're just shooting from
Right.
having been up on the hill observing. We're just calling out targets. I've had a battalion commander blame the hill before because their guns didn't get Top Gun. We're like, whoa. They're the regimental, the senior 0861 in the regiment was up here and saw that we did everything right. Don't fucking blame us because your guys suck.
Right. So I kind of set that goal. I was like, listen, here's my expectation. Like, we are trying to achieve this, right? And so you would start to get people like really started to pucker up on that whole thing. But man, by the time we went out there to that Rolling Thunder, we were running like clockwork. There was no stopping Mike Battery.
What year was this?
2010.
Okay. Oh,
So,
I was at that one.
Were you? Okay. So you're like, hey, you tell Mike Battery move at 2:30 in the morning, we're moving. Like, you want us to do anything, we're doing anything. We're night moving, we're whatever. Like, I was moving the battery even when I didn't have orders to move the battery. Like, I'd be calling to headquarters and I'd be like, hey, I want to move. I just shot, I want to move.
Yeah.
And we're moving at like 2:30 in the morning. We're doing RSOPing at night. We're crushing it. We're doing really, really well. What was really interesting about it was a couple of the other batteries in my battalion at the time were having such trouble like getting their act together that all of a sudden the ammunition started getting shifted around, right? So like, I think we had in our training plan for 2 weeks out there, we had been allocated like something like 600 rounds to shoot, whatever it was. I think we shot over 1,700 rounds of ammunition at battery. Yeah, jeez. I mean, like they just kept giving us ammo. So like Mike Battery's got all guns up, everything's running, their maintenance is good, they're shooting, they're moving. Like, give them the ammo, or we're gonna have to turn it back in. You know how that all goes. Yeah, that was just in my battalion, not at the regiment, right? Yeah. So yeah, that was really great. And then I think as everybody started to see it working, it started to get better. But there were always those times where, the artillery listeners will understand this, but safety is a big deal, right? And our safety SOP has been written in the blood of accidents, right? Either to equipment or personnel or whatever. So it's like putting up a traffic light in the middle of town. It never comes down. Once it is in the regimental safety SOP, that's it. So as the CO, you live and die by the regimental safety SOP, what you can and cannot do. Well, you take a guy like me that grew up in 29 Palms in the desert with a 9 or 8. Oh yeah. And then put me, I'm like, there's no pulling the wool over my eyes on what you can and can't do. I know, because I've done it, right? Mm-hmm. So I would start to scare the shit out of people. So as you know, at Bragg, there's 2 impact areas, right? I don't know what they're called, but left and right, or 1 and 2, or A and B, whatever they are. And they're physically separated by space. And there are firing positions down that, middle part of between the 2 impact areas. Yeah. So I was like, well, here's what we're going to do tomorrow. We are going to shoot a battery fire for effect into the 1 impact area. And then we are going to calculate data and shift trails, and we're going to shoot a battery fire for effect into the other impact area. So we're going to have 2 sets of safety, right? And all you're doing is just picking up the trails and shifting the howitzer. I mean, not the trails. Yeah, the trails. They spin on the wheels. Anyway, you get what I'm talking about. So,
I don't understand.
right, I'm trying to describe this to the to people. Right, but basically, it's when you pick the howitzer up and you turn it around, right? So, like, think of the howitzer for people who are artillerymen or women, I guess now artillery people. The tube can only go left or right so much before it hits its limit stops. So if you want it to shoot more to the right, you got to like pick it up and spin it a little bit and move it. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's completely legitimate, shooting out of traverse missions. You just pick up the piece of, you would have thought that I was trying to bomb a mosque. Like, yeah. It was crazy. Like, I'm like, wait, what is wrong with you artillery people? Like, this fundamentally, like, there is nothing wrong or unsafe about this at all. Like, it was this huge thing. And like Marsloff, he was fighting me on it the whole time. He's like, it's not safe. It's not safe. I don't want to do it, blah, blah, blah. I was like, Gunny, come on. Like, what is you're an artilleryman. Like, you should be dying to want to do this stuff, right?
Plus, it's part of the TNR. Like, it's not like
that was my justification for it. Yeah.
It's a basic thing that you're supposed to be able to do. It blows my mind when people get all worked up about doing stuff that you're advertising that you can do. It's like, if you're too afraid to do it or we can't do it,
right?
Then why are we saying that we can? Like, take it out of the fucking TNR.
Right. Another good story too was there's an awesome happy ending to Brian Marsloff because he and I are like the best of friends now. It started off really rough, and I think if he was a guest on this podcast with me, he would probably be saying, "Yeah, I did not fucking like that guy at all when I first met him." But the other thing too that was kind of funny with the rules and the regulations was people, and this may be a problem with the artillery community that's setting in now, but like, I grew up in the artillery community where we didn't have GPSs on the howitzers. Like, we didn't have all this internal navigation gyros and stuff on each individual howitzer. We went out there and we laid those howitzers using old school survey and aiming circles, right? Like Tifu Ulu, Sad Ulu, like putting the stuff on the aiming circles. You saw the officers out there doing it. Like, they're doing all the thing. They're, gun number one, aiming point identified. Like, you're doing all of that. That's how you lay the battery in the old days. And so the rules in the safety SOP were like, you had to have 2 independent checks of your directional control. So in order to make sure that the howitzer is pointed in the direction it's supposed to be pointed in, you had to have a primary mechanism for laying the getting directional control. And in the new 777s, it's basically whatever the computer says, right?
Yeah, move it until the computer says to stop.
Yeah, right. So then all of a sudden, like, there's no need for aiming circles in the battery anymore. So you start to see the aiming circle experience and ability like atrophy. Like, nobody even knows how to set the thing up anymore. Yeah. They barely teach it at Fort Sill anymore. But I grew up on that thing. So I remember we had one of the howitzers went down, and I can't remember all the details, but basically what we didn't have was a secondary means per the SOP to ensure that the howitzer was pointing in the right direction. So I had really high confidence that the howitzer was pointing in the right direction, but I had no independent second way to verify it. So I'm saying the battery pause, and I'm like, all right, XO, go take an aiming circle out of my Hummer, drive over to the survey control point over on Fort Campbell. Okay, get the plumb bob, set up over the survey control point, right? Get your distance, get your direction, do your Tifu Ulu, get your right, and we're going to shoot a SIMO off the sun. And so, get up the radio, and if we don't have radio, just call me on the cell phone. But we're not going to sit out here and not shoot just because we don't have radio comms. Like, call me on my cell phone. And so for people who don't know what a SIMO is, it's like, I can't remember what it's, simultaneous, whatever. But basically, it's a way, the sun is so far away from the Earth that you can transfer directional control through angles like geometry by tracking the edge of the sun. So you put this little special cap on the end of the aiming circle. You can look directly at the sun, put the reticle pattern on the edge of the sun. And as the sun is moving, both aiming circles are tracking the sun, and over the radio you say like tracking, tip, and when you both say tip, you stop, and you look down, and that one aiming circle has now transferred its survey accurate directional control to the second aiming circle, and you can use that to lay the battery, right?
This is why the school for artillery officers is so long.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly. But it's easy if you know how to do it. Like, if you've done it a million times, which I've done it a million, I could do it. I don't even need the cheat card. Even today, at 53 years old, I could do a SIMO, no problem. And like I said before, like, everybody looked at me like I had a dick coming out of my forehead. Like, what? They're like, we can't do that. I'm like, what do you mean you can't do that? Show me in the regimental safety SOP where it says we are not allowed to do a SIMO.
Yeah.
It's illegal. Can't do it. It's like, oh my God, you would like, this was phone calls from the INI up to the battalion staff. Like, Major Armstrong wants to do a SIMO to get directional
He's losing
control.
it out here.
Right. And all of a sudden I just said like, hey, I'm not talking to anybody about this until the battalion FAC gets on the line. The field artillery chief. Right.
Yeah.
So Master Guns gets on. I'm like, hey, Master Guns, I'm trying to do a SIMO for my independent verification check. As Mr. Goes like, what's the problem, sir? I'm like, nobody here wants to do it except me. It's like, put your gunny on the phone. You know, so it's like one of those things. So that was kind of like fun. So as the Marines start seeing like, hey, we're doing things that are a little bit harder, like, you know, no one is there. No, or we can't do it. It's just never going to work in this battery ever again. And it just made the whole battery click together. And it was the culmination was that AT at Bragg for the first part of my command. And then after that, it just kept going really, really well.
It's definitely better when you have an environment where people, it's not a, we can't do that. It's like, how can we do that kind of thought process? Like, how do we attack this? Rather than, there's too many people that dismiss stuff immediately just because it's not something that they do normally. Even if it's something that's, you know, fair, you know, relatively easy or whatever. It's like they just dismiss it because it's like, well, we don't do that here, or we've never done that. It's like, well, we haven't yet, but that doesn't mean we can't, you know, like, and again, like I said before, like with TNR standards, it's like, why are we advertising that we can do this shit if we don't actually think that we can do it? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is that even, let's take it off our capabilities list because it's not realistic, you know? And if we're not going to do that, then let's fucking practice to it and figure out how to do it because we're advertising it.
Like a hip shoot, right? Like, you know, you read the pubs, there's procedures for doing a hip shoot, which is basically stopping an artillery battery on the move and setting them up and just firing them, right? Like but to do that, like with safety and firing points and everything, it's really, really hard. But out in 29 Palms, you could do it. You could just kind of look at the tubes and be like, well, I ain't going to shoot out, so go ahead and shoot. I mean, like, you know, you may not hit the target, but you're not going to kill anybody either.
Yeah, 29 Palms is a different beast. Yeah,
totally different beast.
Have you ever, so as all your years as an arty guy, have you ever had a firing incident?
So I have
shoot out the box or anything? So
I have never been in a battery that's fired out of the box. I've been on the receiving end of firing out of the box. You know, like as an FO, I've seen, you know, stuff go outside the box. There's all the stories about like the colonel's wife being killed in the car with it, you know, like from Lejeune, like all those stories, these enduring stories. I don't even know.
That story's been around for years.
It's been around for years. It's like as old as the driftwood, you know.
That's why we can't shoot over Lyman Road.
The highway. Right.
Yeah, Lyman Road, I think it is.
Yeah. So like because of that one incident, right? It's like it's just because
supposedly
of an accident. Right. Exactly. Right. But you know, so but you know what's been really interesting is I have seen and I have been a participant in watching corners get cut and then seeing why those rules are in existence. So like one of my favorite stories to tell, and I can't get in trouble for it now, but I was a brand new second lieutenant at Sierra Battery 511, and I was riding around the Exos Hummer, and this was back with the old powder increments, the green and the white bags, right? We had to burn the extra increments. And so you would go out and you'd lay the increments out and you'd start, and there was a procedure for how, you know, like too high, too wide, you could never, you know, going into the wind, it had to be in an L, like all these rules. And we were under the gun and for time, and the battery couldn't move until we burned the powder. So we're like piling all this stuff. And the battery gunny, the XO, and I are the three people there burning this powder. And the XO and the battery gunny are like, they're like, we're just we're making a line of it, right? It's this huge thing. It's way, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, I remember at Fort Sill, like this being like on the safety test, like we're not doing this right, whatever. And the XO was like, don't worry about it.
Gentlemen.
Right. Famous last words. Don't worry. We do this all the time. So, okay, fine. We do this all the time. We light it. It starts burning. And if you've ever seen powder burn, like it starts off and you're like, oh, that's not that bad. And then all of a sudden it just gets bigger.
Yeah, it's huge.
And it's like you get this twirling tornado of flame and everything. Well, like 29 Palms is, it's bright and it's hot and you think you can stand near of it. And the next thing you know, you're running in the opposite direction. So hot. And so the Exos Hummer was sitting there and well away from the fire from where we were burning. But they had set so much up and the wind shifted and that fire funnel came back over this way and set the entire Humvee on fire. Like the canvas, everything, the canvas melted off. It was a high back Hummer. Like the canvas melted off the whole thing. We had to go back to the battery position and like, oh shit, you know, like I think we like pulled the canvas off so nobody could tell how bad it was. And it was one of those old Desert Storm Hummers anyway, so it was like tan and green and all fucked up way and oil all over it still. So nobody really knew how bad it was. But man, that was funny. I looked at that. I was like, ooh, that's why that rule exists.
So you only lost the canvas, huh?
Just lost the canvas, yeah. And some scorch marks on the side. When we were at 29 pounds, like our SOP in our battery was doors were off. The little soft side doors. You took the doors, you ratchet strapped them to the hood. Like, so nobody had doors on in their Humvees. I don't remember why that was an SOP in my battery, but nobody had doors on their Humvees. So it was just that back canvas that burned.
Really?
But,
yeah. So for people that may not know what you're talking about, so like you said, the green bag, red bag, or white bag, whatever, the different charges at the, there's like, you guys get tons of different charges and you kind of mix and match them for whatever the mission is, right? And then at the end of the field op, you have all the extra charges, powder charges. Can't bring those back to the ASP, so you burn them. And that's what you're talking about. These big charges of gunpowder, basically.
Right.
And it's bright. Like, you can't look. It's like a torch. It's like a blow, like someone welding, like a welder. It's that bright. It's pretty wild.
It's pretty bright. Yeah, you can't, in the old days, they've fixed this new with the max charges, but like if you had a green bag charge, and I think it went up to like charge 5 green bag means all 5 bags get loaded into the howitzer and you fire, right? So if the mission came down and said charge 3 green bags, well, charge 4 and charge 5 were taken out of that stack, and you only put the increments, the charges 1, 2, and 3 behind. But each powder increment number was a different size, so you could never take like 3 leftovers and make a new propellant.
Oh,
right.
See, so I didn't know that.
You can never recycle. So like if you didn't shoot charge 4, you had to burn it. Like you couldn't take if it was a charge 3 mission, you couldn't take 3 leftover charge 4s and put them together. It doesn't work like that.
Oh, see, I learn something new every day.
Yeah. So
I thought you could do that.
With the new max charges, you can do that. You can take the leftover increments and turn them back in and everything. But you pull out a charge 5 green bag. If you only shoot a charge 3 mission, 4 and 5 have to be burned. And they would have like this thing called the burn pit. And part of the gun procedure was that one of the section members would have to hold up charge 4 and charge 5 green bag. And the section chief would have to look to make sure that those numbers were actually charge 4 and charge 5 bags. So he knew that 1, 2, and 3 were in the tube and all that stuff. So you physically burned them.
That's so 2 things. One, how they're supposed to verify the bags, right? That's the gun chief's position is to verify everything before the artillery piece is fired, right? He's going through and like, yes, correct fuse, yes, correct round, yes, correct powder, yes, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's ready, fire, pull the string, And when my very first field op with 210 in 2009, it was like November or December of 2009, was on OP5 at Camp Lejeune. And we had pulled out there. And if you're familiar with that area, with OP5, it's the big metal tower. And if you're driving out, it's like you're driving out to Onslow Beach. And this is for the people that may not be familiar or may have been in Lejeune but not know what I'm talking about. If you're driving out to Onslow Beach, it splits right there. It has that Y. And before the Y is OP5 on the left-hand side, that big metal tower. There's a big dirt open area. And then you can see the berm for the impact area. And then beyond that, you can see the impact area. We were set up, our Fire Support Coordination Center pulled up to the tower, and we had FOs in the tower. And then we started setting up our Fire Support Coordination Center on the side of the hill next to the tower. And range control comes out, and he's like, hey, you guys can't set up on the side of the hill because of erosion. Like, there's erosion concern. So you're going to have to move your shit down from the hillside to this spot right over here. And he like points down to a spot at the bottom of the hill. And we're like, hey, man, we've already got the entire tent up. All the OEs are up, like all the antennas. Everything's already set up. Is there any way we can just stay here? And he's like, well, give me a second. He calls back to another range control person. He comes back. He's like, all right, you guys can leave your tents and stuff up here, but you got to pull your vehicles down to the road, and you don't set up here again next time. We're like, cool, which is awesome that he did that. Most guys would be like, no, take it down and move it. So we're sitting there, and like I said, it's my first field op, and we're all hanging out and stuff like that. And we're waiting on the batteries to get set up so that they can shoot their check round. For those that are outside the artillery world, the check round is the initial round that they shoot out just to confirm that the safety is correct and that the round is impacting inside the impact area and everything's safe. And then the observer is watching, they see that, and they call back, not the correction, but the spottings to the battery so they're aware of where the round impacted compared to where they thought it would.
Right.
So we're getting all set up. Everything's ready to go. We're getting ready to shoot the check round. I'm inside the fire support coordination tent. I'm not up on the tower. So the tower's right outside of the tent, And the mission comes through. It was Fox 212. They were attached to 210 for some reason at that time. There was something with the regimental headquarters was gone, so the individual battalion was attached to us. But they shot their fucking check round, and I'm inside the tent, and I hear shot target number da 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 da, and I hear poof, off in the distance where they actually shot. And I looked over at Delara, and I'm like, "Hey, bro, you want to go outside?" And did we lose comm there?
Yeah, just for a second there.
Oh, I was saying, so we're sitting inside the FSCC tent, and I hear the shooting off in the distance of the check round, and I hear shot target number blah 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 over the radio. And I look over at my buddy Delara, and I'm like, "Hey man, you want to go outside and watch the fireworks?" And he's like, "Nah, it's okay." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's cool, whatever." And I just sat there, and I hear this boom, and I'm like, "God damn!" Like, this is my first field op with artillery. I'm like,
yeah.
Man, that is way louder out here by the impact area. And then I hear my gunny at the time, Gunny Klein, outside the tent. He's a country dude. He's like, check fire, check fire, check fire. We're like, what the fuck? So we just start check fire, check fire, check fire. Like grabbing all the radios, hitting check fire and everything. Well, what just happened? They're like, someone ran up to the tent. They're like, are you guys okay? And we're like, yeah, what happened? And we come out of the tent. And they're like, the round landed right there. And we're like, where? And the dude pointed. It was 50 meters from us where the check round landed outside of the impact area, right next to where we had set up and right in the exact same spot where the range control guy told us that he was going to make us move. Had we moved like he told us to, our tent would have been hit directly by that artillery round. And it was just like,
for that to happen though, like it might be interesting to walk through like for 5 minutes what actually happens, what has to happen before a round goes down range, right? Because like if something hit that close to your OP, like there are so many things that went wrong to make that happen, which is why it really doesn't happen all that much. Like, so when you're on the hill and they call and they give you the plots for your safety box, those are calculated, and they have buffer upon buffer upon buffer to make sure that even the most errant round isn't going to fall outside that safety box, right? So even if something plots outside the safety box, doesn't mean it's going to plot outside the impact area. So that's your first, like, nobody's going to get killed sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But when you call in that check round mission, which is like generally, you were explaining the check round mission, it's also generally in the middle of the impact area too, right? It's never on the edge. Like, you kind of want to just make sure that it's going where it's supposed to go. So you call back, grid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the first thing that happens is the fire direction officers in the FDC, this is just at the battery level, is going to like look at the map and take a pin and put it right in that grid that you just called in, because that safety box is also plotted on his map. And he's going to look at that and he's going to say, okay, that plot's safe. So the target location has been plotted safe. Now, if you're doing voice comms, here's where the first error can be introduced. You say grid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And a FATEDS operator enters in grid 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and typos something, right? Okay, that's the first place an error can happen. Then after it plots safe, and now the FDC is working up data, and for people that aren't artillery people, like data translates into basically three big things: how far up and down the tube has to be pointing to hit that target, how far left and right it has to be pointing to hit that target, and how much powder has to go behind that charge in order to make it go that distance, right? So those three big things. There's a ton of stuff, but that's three of them. So the computer is going to figure that math out. And then at the same time, there is a backup independent calculation taking place. It's usually a manual gunnery. So like the slide rules and the wheels and all that stuff.
Got the battle axe out.
Yeah, right. Now, it's never going to match up 1 for 1 because that manual data is a lot more inaccurate than the computer. But as long as it's close, right, then you know that your firing solution has been checked by two independent things. They're within tolerance of each other. And then they call that data down to the gun line, right? So now you've got a section chief who is in charge of one howitzer, and let's just say he has 8 Marines or 10 Marines, whatever the standard is these days. And he's going to take that data, is going to come down to his little handheld device, and it's going to tell him, here is the shell you're going to use, here's the fuse you're going to use, here's the propellant that you're going to use, like that green bag that we were talking about, or the max charges. Here's how many increments you're going to put behind it. Here's how far up and down and left and right that gun has to point. Now, you were talking before, like what is a section chief verifying? There's this choreography that takes place in the gun line. Like every single motion that's taking place to load that gun and get it ready to fire is a choreographed, like this guy doesn't do this until the guy previous to him does that, right? So like open the breech, inspect the breech. Meanwhile, the section chief is reading off the data, and you've got a guy with a hand crank, and he's hand cranking it up so the gun is moving up and down, and he's got a readout. And then there's a guy that's the quadrant elevation, and then a guy that's running the deflection is also a hand wheel, which is deflection is the same thing as left and right. And so then the section chief has to go in and say, like, is the quadrant correct? Does it match the box? Yes. Does the deflection match the box? Yes. Can I verify the charges? And that's where the guys are holding up the charges, or he looks at the charges to make sure. And before that round even gets loaded up, he has to physically touch that round and say, like, this is an HE round and not a WP or an illumination round. This is a PD fuse, a point detonating fuse, and not a time fuse, or a VT fuse, or any of those shell fuse combinations. Like, he has to verify everything, right? So that ostensibly when that round fires, it has the accurate data on it, exactly as read off by the FDC and all that stuff. So the most likely culprit for a round not landing where it's supposed to land is on the gun line, right? It is a charge error. It is a shell fuse combination error. It is a deflection or a quadrant not properly set on the gun.
Yeah.
That's so if something hit your OP, it was probably a charge error.
That's what it was. It was a charge error. So it was getting dark out. They shot the check round at night, which I'm not a big fan of necessarily. But when he went to verify the powder, I guess at night, the SOP is they put their hand on it and they count the charges, or the increments with their hands. I guess he didn't do that, and the powder monkey put in half the amount he was supposed to. So if it was supposed to be 2, he only put in 1 or whatever it was.
Yep.
And I just I'll always remember that. That was my first fire mission, first round in the being with artillery, and I just hear, and it's so weird, man. The sound of an artillery round like landing on you, basically 50 meters is fucking close. That's in the ECR of it. It's just a weird noise, and then that explosion, I was like, damn, that is so loud out here. Like thinking oh, this is normal. And then everyone freaks out. And I'm like, what is happening? The gun chief, the section chief got fired, got his safety card pulled, but they fucking let him retake his safety test like 2 weeks later, and he became a gun chief again. I'm like, that is crazy. I can't believe. And the thing was, too, is that we were at OP5, right? We were on OP5, and then there's that big dirt open area I was talking about. On the other side of it was the battalion main had their COC and all that shit set up. So they weren't really between us. It was really close to us, but it was like 200 or 300 meters from those guys. But even having it that close to hitting your battalion command center and still letting this dude keep his safety card, like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a mistake you make, and you should never come back from. Like,
that's true. I have the saying that I've used my whole life, mostly to justify my own mistakes. But through life's biggest mistakes comes life's greatest lessons, right? So you can make the argument that I don't think what happened there sounds right, like 2 weeks later. But like you could make an argument as a leader. You could say like, who is the most likely person to never let a charge error happen ever again? Probably that guy,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
true.
to turn around 2 weeks later, that's where you get into this trouble of like, and I don't know what the rules are right now at the regiments, but like when you have a rule that says like, hey, nobody can be a section chief that's under the rank of staff sergeant, which is what it was when I grew up, right? That means you could have staff sergeants that you don't trust at all, and the only reason they're on the gun line is because you need a staff sergeant on that gun.
Man, I've never really seen. I know staff sergeants are a lot of times you'll have them as section chiefs, but you don't really see too many staff sergeant section chiefs.
They should be corporals. Yeah.
A lot of times I see sergeants that are like senior sergeants that are section chiefs and stuff like that. So
the other thing as they're doing what they're supposed to do, nothing wrong will happen in artillery. I mean, it'd be something very weird would have to happen.
It takes a mature individual, and rank doesn't necessarily just because you're a sergeant or a staff sergeant doesn't necessarily mean you're mature. You have to be a corporal, with the sense to check everything. Like, one of those, that's one of those mistakes. It's like, well, I'm sure, like, what could go wrong? Like, the powder guy's really going to fuck it up. I don't need to double check that, and then they fuck it up. And
that's why that safety SOP is written in blood. I mean, that thing.
The other incident we had. So it's funny you brought up the colonel's wife. That's the big tale at 10th Marines, that some colonel's wife's car got hit by an HE round in like the 60s or something, and that's why we can't shoot over Lyman Road without having road guards and stuff. We had a guy. Well, one of my scouts was out on a field op, called in a Mike 825 round, which is the white phosphorus round that's base ejecting. It basically, it's a screening round. You know what it is. But for the regular
it shoots
people.
out like in a V. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's an airburst kind of weapon, and then the canister continues on. Well, apparently at Camp Lejeune, they changed this. There's a minimum elevation or whatever the tube is supposed to be at to keep rounds from skipping. And they were at that, I think, at the minimum or something like that when they fired this round. And the Mike 825 round shot, base ejected the WP or whatever, and then the shell skipped out of the impact area and hit a van that was driving down Lyman Road. Some dude driving home from work. This was actually one of my scouts that called this in, so this is actually real. But hit this dude's car as he was on his way home, just driving down the road, and all of a sudden, boom, a 100-pound artillery canister slams into the side of his vehicle.
That's one of those weird things.
I think they had to change the Camp Lejeune specific range regs to change that minimum deflection, or not deflection. What is
elevation, quadrant
elevation?
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because something can skip off. I mean, those things are going fast.
It's crazy. Like some of the stuff you see as a scout or being in artillery, doing any kind of combined arms stuff like that, like the mistakes that happen. And I don't know, being an observer, you're always on the end of where the mistake is occurring. It seems like, it's like
you see it.
And that's why, as I starting off, seeing that first round, almost kill us, and then moving along my career and seeing one firing incident after another, it really reinforces you as to why, like you said, these rules are written in blood, and I think I carried that over to my time as a JTAC too, and guys would get, try to cut corners or whatever, like, hey, lead called visual tally when we're using IR pointers at night. So -2 is obviously good. He doesn't need to call it either. Like, bullshit, man. You need to make sure that dude knows exactly where he's shooting, exactly where you're at, exactly where the target is. Like, you're assuming that he knows what's going on, and that's how people get killed. And I've gotten in arguments with people. I've gotten arguments with officers before. Like, no, man, this is how it's done. If you want to pull the pub out, I've got it right here in my bag. I used to carry my pubs around with me because I'm like, I'm not going to have this argument. It's in the pub. Like, if you want to read the pub and tell me, then that is how it is. But we're going to train to what this says because that's what we're supposed to do. And
it's the great equalizer, right? The pub.
Yeah,
it's the great equalizer.
I've had multiple times. I had a Cobra guy tell me, like, I was doing a control out in 29 Palms. It was a simulated control through some kind of training thing they had out there. I don't remember what it was. It was a huge exercise. And I had a ISR on, and I found a target. I found a target with the ISR, but the ISR was coming off station. At the same time, I had a Cobra section coming on station. So I was like, hey, pull me a grid. Let's refine that. And then I'm going to pass that to the helos, and we're going to do a type 2 control, type 2 bomb on coordinate with a Hellfire. I'm going to ground base lays on this, location or whatever. And then afterwards, this guy comes over to me. He's like, you can't do that. You can't pass targeting data from a UAV to this and blah, blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? He's like, that's not what a type 2 control is. And I'm like, that's exactly what a type 2 control is. And the fact that you're arguing with me about this you're a pilot, as a Cobra pilot, is blowing my mind right now. And I pull out my pub, and it was him. And then at this point, another guy came over who's an F-18 driver, and we're having this discussion. And I showed him, I'm like, here it is in the pub. And they're like, well, that's just not how I was brought up. And I'm like, okay, no, that's not how this works. I don't care how you were brought up. You were obviously brought up wrong. Like, this is how you fucking do it, man. Like,
right.
So for those people that are listening out there, carry your pubs. Know what the hell you're talking about.
Exactly.
Because, no one can argue with knowing, when you know what you're talking about. Yeah. And you show them, like, here's how we're supposed to fucking do it. And if you disagree with how we're doing it, then let's make a change. Let's go through the formalities of getting this changed, just like with our TNR standards. If we can't meet the TNR standards, let's just change it to say that we can't meet it because it's not realistic.
Yeah. Hey, what are the chances we can pause for 1 second?
Go ahead.
I got to make a head call real quick.
For sure.
I'm 50.
No, I get it.
Okay. All right, the old man is back.
Welcome back. Nah, you're all good. I'm gonna have
I
to
don't
go
know
here
if you
a
can
little.
like mark the time and edit that out.
Oh yeah, for sure. I always
Yeah.
yeah. It's no big deal. I always tell people that. Like my whole thing is I try to keep it as natural as possible, but I will go back and edit out stuff like that. I'll
Yeah.
go back and if like someone throws out someone's name that's not like common, if it's a common name, I don't care. But if it's uncommon and you're like talking trash about somebody,
Oh yeah.
then I'm like, I'm going to delete their name out just because it's not fair to, and I'll put this in the podcast, but on the last podcast I had Sal on, he was talking about his time in
I got
Iraq.
that queued up to listen to tomorrow.
I'll tell you what, man, that is probably one of the most intense podcasts I've done. Like on one deployment, he earned 2 Purple Hearts. He got stepped on an IED, got blown up, like messed his knees up, almost lost an eye, got medevac, and a week later he was back out to go on patrol with his unit. He left the hospital, went back out to his unit, and then his unit on 2 separate occasions got hit by 5,000-pound truck bombs. The second one he was part of. He was in the building right next. He was 100 feet from the truck bomb as it went off. So he got a second Purple Heart that time. Also had his helmet shot off his head by a marksman. So it's a.
Wow.
But
yeah, I got that queued up. I got to drive tomorrow about an hour and a half. So
we didn't even get through everything. He left the Marine Corps. He was an assaultman. He got out of active duty, got medically separated, and then ended up his medical issues like his eye and stuff got better, and ended up coming back in to Anglico. He went over to third Anglico. Cool. So that's where we stopped. So my next interview with him is going to be his time with Anglico and probably get back into some of the other stuff that he did. Yeah. But yeah, man, like
so we were talking about Mike battery and like that that's where we left off, right? I know we got off on a tangent. We were talking about like accidents that happen in the gun line and stuff like that, but
yeah.
Like the artillery community, I think I said this on a podcast, the earlier podcast with you, but like the artillery community will really eat their young. I mean, if you are not tactically and technically proficient as an artilleryman, you kill people.
Sure.
So we're really, really hard on ourselves, especially on the officer side. You probably don't see this, but like, man, you're a fucked up lieutenant and you're going to get your shit eaten alive.
Oh, I've seen the lieutenants that aren't part of the in crowd. They fuck something up or something like that, and it's immediately like, I don't know. You see them coming over and hanging out with the enlisted Marines, hanging out in their office for a little bit,
but like
chilling with them.
You had who was it? Chris Walker. Who was the other artillery officer they had on the guides on the TV shows now?
Yeah, Walker.
Yeah, he was talking about like how it's so important to have battery time, as a younger officer in order to you can't just stay on the hill the whole time. You can't be, and the benefits or the pros and cons of creating, like, should fire sport be its own MOS? Like, if I didn't have that time as a fire direction officer, as a lieutenant, I would have never been able to be a really effective battery commander, because I wouldn't have understood anything that happened, in the battery position.
Yeah, you have to understand the machine and how it works if you're going to be in charge of it. Right, for sure. Right. I like the idea of having a separate. I don't really fully understand why we don't have like an observer kind of unit rather than just attach us to artillery. Because when I was at 210, and I've talked to other guys that kind of feel the same way, you're like the bastard child of artillery, right? No one at the artillery battalion really cares about the observers, right? It's all about the guns. The guns are shooting, and I don't mean that like. No,
I get it. Yeah,
they care, but they don't care. Like the focus of training is on the guns, and because you're not gonna deploy with your artillery unit more than likely. They're a supporting unit for somebody else. You're gonna deploy with somebody else, which you run into the problem then. Like me, I get attached to 3.6. Well, nobody at 3.6 cares about you either. You're an attachment. You're some pogue attachment that's here, right. And sometimes it's tough for scouts at artillery units to justify or to get their units to pay for some training, not outside of the normal artillery world. Like I wanted to send one of my scouts to the Summer Mountain Leaders course at Bridgeport, and man, it took me like an hour of talking to the ops chief, like convincing him why I should get the unit to pay for a guy to go to training that the unit's never going to benefit from it because he's going to deploy with an infantry battalion, and they're the ones that are going to receive the benefit from it. And I see the argument for having a separate unit, kind of like an Anglico, I guess, that are just observers, where they can focus on their own training, they get their own funding. Like, it's all, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts of that are as an officer, as an artillery officer.
You just made me think of something, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet, but let's it would be interesting to kind of think through this. What's going to happen to the observer fire support community when we invert the equipment to rockets? Like, the Ford observers aren't bracketing rockets, right? They're getting like high order 10-digit grids, right? They're getting target looking, right? So maybe they haven't thought through this yet, but maybe somebody's going to stand up and say, like, all right, well, what are we going to do with the 0861 community? Like, we still have to have them, but if they're only going to be at the firing battalion levels and we're only going to have 5 batteries total, maybe we should pull the whole 0861 community up into the Anglico community, create a more broader mission set for the Anglico community, and when one of those howitzer batteries goes out to the field, or an infantry unit needs an observer, they're sourcing those from a centralized unit like Anglico. I mean, maybe, again, that just came to my head.
I get it. It's kind of like being at Anglico and being like, hey, we need to go to the field next week, call up some, find out what squadron can support us. It'd be the same way. Hey, call up the observer, see if they got guys available for next week for a field op or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. There's that traditional command and control relationships, where if you're like 210 or if you're at like, you're at 6 Marines, generally you're supporting 6 Marines, stuff like that. I mean, you're going to lose some of that. With already going to rockets, what is going to happen with 6
there's no such thing as like, I mean, those 2 batteries are going to pick up the traditional infantry, massing fires to allow an infantry unit to maneuver, or in the defense, like that's going to be, but like the rocket I mean, the whole idea of a linear battlefield is just, I think, is becoming, dismissed, as we, progress.
What if instead of sending everyone to like Anglico, you take the guys that would normally be at your artillery battalion, your fire support guys, your observers, and they just go to the infantry battalions, and now you're part of weapons company. You're part of weapons company as a observer there all the time. So now you have a school trained observer that can school up their mortar observers, because their mortar observers are OJT. They don't go to any formal schooling. It's, hey bro, here's a set of binoculars. Say this. Okay, hey, you're an observer now. Congrats. Obviously there's more to it than that, but only if that individual that's training the other guys takes the time to give them that good training. I can see the argument for having 6-1s that are permanently with an infantry unit, and then, I mean, that seems the most logical thing to me, because that's who you're normally going to deploy with. I just don't see, I didn't really think about it until you said it about, hey, rockets are going to be taken over, so who's going to be the observers for that? But because it's a 6-1, you're not getting any training when you're out shooting, what do they call them? The Ripper rounds from the HIMARS, the training rounds, because they don't actually hit the target. They don't actually go to the impact point. They just, you feed them a bunch of information, then they launch that telephone pole, then it just kind of goes wherever. It goes in a general area, but it's not going to the actual target.
Guided.
So
it's got no guidance.
So where's the training value there? I don't know, man. I wonder.
It could be, and I haven't seen any sort of like layout about how the artillery community is going to be restructured, but I got to imagine that they're probably not going to take away the regimental headquarters, right? They're still going to have a billet for a colonel to be a regimental commander in the artillery community, or otherwise the artillery officer community just won't exist. So let's assume that they would keep the regiments, and maybe what they'll do is they'll say like, okay, 111, 211, and 511, or 111, 211, and 511 are now rocket battalions, and 311 is going to be a 2 battalion because they're up in 29 pounds. So it's easier, or maybe they invert that. I don't know, but maybe the observers are part of headquarters battery now. Like maybe they
regiment. Everybody's at regiment headquarters,
right? And then farm that. That way, they're still in the artillery community. I would worry about, from a career progression standpoint, what would happen to a bunch of sergeants and staff sergeants and maybe even gunnies who reside at the infantry community as 0861s with career fitness reports. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's an issue that you would have to be addressed, I guess. But
but I see what you're saying.
For me, my whole point, my thinking is, where can you send someone where they're going to get the best training, and to a unit that's going to see the value in sending guys to Mountain Com, Summer Mountain Leaders course, going through different like foreign weapons instructor course, stuff like that. The outside the box kind of training that makes you overall a better Marine, but just even a better asset as a 6'1" going to support an infantry battalion, going to a combat zone. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird world, I guess. Old guys like you and I, we're just sit to the side and kind of watch them figure it out and
hey,
see
at least
what
we're
they
not
do.
tankers.
I was going to say, as a former tanker, I guess if you want to call yourself that, what is your thought process on them taking tanks completely out of the Marine Corps inventory?
Yeah, so I mean, there's obviously pros and cons to it, right? You lose that ability. So, like, when you think about the tank community, it's so much different now to me, because you would never think about breaking a tank section down to anything less than 2 tanks supporting each other, right? Because that whole scratch my back, scratch you watch me, I watch you kind of thing. And the same thing with the artillery community. Like, you would never think about breaking a battery down into single guns, because it was about massing and everything. Yeah. But, the tank has become such an incredibly sophisticated weapon system that it has such a great application. It has such a great purpose, because not only is it doing the tank on tank stuff, but it's optics, right? And it's laser, and it's accuracy to be able to point of aim, point of impact at 2,500 meters. I mean, that's an incredible weapon system. The problem is the fucking thing is 65 tons.
Yeah.
And if the Marine Corps is saying, like, all right, well, we've only got 108 of these, or however many, I mean, there's 54 tanks in a battalion. You got 2 active duty tank battalions and a reserve tank battalion. It's like, let's call it, I'm just going to round it and say we got 150 tanks in the Marine Corps, right? Well, outside of traditional linear combat, what are we doing with them?
Yeah.
And I don't think that I'm going to make any friends in the tank community by saying this, but it's like one of those things where you're like, okay, are we going to have 150 pieces of expensive gear and all of this for the off chance that the Marine Corps, in its projection of naval power mission, with a new and improved enemy, what is the likelihood that we're going to be arriving somewhere on amphibious shipping and have to roll tanks off and fight a linear battle?
Yeah.
And if we did, what's the likelihood that we would just get attached an Army tank battalion?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that factors into this, like, how can we repurpose that manpower into new billets that actually, like, people who fly drones or people who interpret data or maybe even cyber Marines or stuff like that. And this is where I get into, like, I think the commandant is an incredibly smart guy, and I hold him in the highest regard. And I think he's right. I hope he's right. Right. Yeah. Because if he's wrong, you're going to destroy a generation of tankers. You're going to destroy a generation of tube artillerymen. It's going to be really hard to come back from. I think the nostalgia of it is sad. Like,
yeah,
I'm
sure there's a lot of old Marine tankers out there that are not very happy with the decision, but I can understand getting rid of tanks. Honestly, the only time I've ever seen tanks being utilized is over in Afghanistan. And like you said, they'd be used for like Overwatch. They'd sit them up on a hilltop somewhere with their tank, with their optics. But can't that same role be replaced by an LAV with a Saber system on it? I mean, don't those have really good targeting optics and stuff like that?
Yeah, or even can't you just put those optics onto a Humvee? Or I mean,
yeah, there's to keep it for just targeting, it would be ridiculous. And I mean, it's such a fucking huge piece of equipment. You get hit by an IED in that thing, you got a tank that goes down. Now you got to bring out another tank to recover it. Like, you have to have...
Oh, yeah.
And then the other thing, too, the other way I saw it utilized, and it wasn't then, was on the MEU. It's like, hey, are we bringing a tank or are we not bringing a tank? All right, we're bringing a tank. And putting a tank on a ship, like, there's already limited room. And now you're like, what can be put in place of the space that, the square footage, the so valuable square footage inside of the holding area of the ship, what can be put there instead of a tank? And I don't know. I mean, I just don't see the value of having tanks around for the Marine Corps. Why? Like what you said, and how the commandant is like looking forward at these like kind of island hopping kind of campaigns, or like, that Pacific Island Yeah, I think LAVs are definitely better suited. Maybe Amtrak's once we get the new one online. But yeah, I agree with the tanks going away. I don't necessarily agree with the artillery. It seems to me if they wanted to make it better for that, for working in the Pacific and stuff, I could see adding more rockets. But at the same time, why not add some 105s? Some lighter artillery that can actually be maneuvered like way easier instead of just a 777 and a HIMARS rocket. Because my concern with the HIMARS, one thing is that each launcher can only hold 6 rounds. So if you're in like an actual pretty heavy fight and you fire the 6 rounds, how long does it take to reload that thing? And get it ready to shoot 6 more rounds or whatever. And I can't imagine. I think a HIMARS round costs like $150,000 each. What's an HE round out of an artillery
Not
tube
that
cost?
much.
Like $200.
Right.
Like it's. I don't know, man. That's way above my level. That's like That's. It's interesting to think about though.
But this is just this is my big question, right? I always play this game like if I was commandant for a day, what would I do, right? The first thing I'd do is make myself commandant for 2 years so I could actually do something. But if I was commandant for a day, what would I do? I have this theory, and I'm probably wrong. And look, if I've got this theory, I'm sure somebody else had this theory and they've tested it and proved it wrong. Otherwise, we'd be doing it. But here it is, right? I just think there's so much more value in spreading everything out and making it harder to shoot everybody than it is by putting everybody together into an armored vehicle like an Amtrak, right? So like, this is going to sound crazy, but just hear me out. Why are we even messing around with having an Amtrak getting Marines to shore, right? Okay. They're covered, they're protected, they can get to shore and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, how about this? What if you took the entire Amtrak company on a MEU and you just gave them all jet skis? And you just said, here come 150 guys ripping across the water on jet skis, and you land on the beach. Like, how hard is it to take out an Amtrak versus a jet ski? Right?
Yeah.
If you take out an Amtrak and 16 guys or however many of those things hold now these days, you take a whole squad of Marines down, like how hard would it be for the enemy to take something out with, a laser guided munition or something off of a drone if there's one guy per jet ski? And you would never do this in training, but in combat, you just ditch the jet skis, leave them on the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, you have like swarming tactics and then ditch the... Huh.
I just don't know why anybody ever thinks about that kind of stuff. Or like, here's another one, right? How great do you... How effective could an infantry battalion move through Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever if one battalion was mounted on motorcycles?
Yeah.
What if you had a motorcycle battalion and you're like, I mean, think of how fast you could close with the enemy if you didn't have a huge dust like rumbling all along and stuff like that. And so that brings me to the artillery community. Like, what about like your thing about the O5s? Like the Army's had the O. I grew up on the O5. The Marine Corps had the O5 still when I came in, right? So each battalion had 4 M101 Alpha 1s, and so or each battery.
That's the 105.
That's the one. That was the old school 105, like the Korea War 105 with like the ballistic shield in the front of it, like the old school one, right? It almost looks like it's a double barrel because it's got a thingy on top. Some master guns would lop my head off for calling it a thingy, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, and we used to tow those things around. We used to shoot them for the TACP shoots because they were just so easy to operate. And I always wondered, like, why don't we have a battery or one battery per battalion of O5s, and you tow these things behind a Humvee, and how fast could you move them? So, if the issue with a O5 is it doesn't shoot as far, or it doesn't have as sophisticated projectile selection as a 9 or 8 or a 777 does, well, who cares? I mean, if you're just trying to suppress the enemy for the infantry and you can move something really, really fast for the Humvee, why wouldn't you have that capability? So I've never understood this whole dynamic.
That was the whole point of having the 120 mortar and the ITV, the internally transportable vehicle. Yeah. That was... So a lot of people... I was on the test team, PFC Kramer. I was out there as a mechanic working on that vehicle. And I've driven that thing thousands of miles through Arctic tundra, through the swamps in North Carolina, through 29 Palms. And it's a sensitive vehicle. It's not marine proof, and that's the problem with the vehicle. And the other thing is that people looked at it and they're like, what the fuck? I'm not riding in this. Like, this thing will get, if you hit an IED, you're going to get killed immediately because there's no armor on it. It's just it's like a little doom buggy basically. And I think because of that, because of the no armor and the current wars that we're in, that program was going to die no matter what. Like that vehicle was going to die no matter what. Because there's no commander that's going to be like, yeah, take out these unarmored vehicles out on patrols or something like that. And people weren't really, the way I heard people talk about it they weren't being looked at the way they should have been. Like you're talking about having a quick move, a vehicle that we can pull up real fast, throw the 120 down, and then start throwing rounds down range, just to support the infantry. Now the infantry guys have wheels instead of just walking everywhere, and it's maneuverable. So it's something they've tried, but maybe they just didn't perfect it. Maybe it just wasn't the right time for it. And It looks like the Marine Corps has ditched the ITV completely. Like that's all gone now. And now they're using the razors, the side-by-side, the UHVs or whatever they're called, which honestly, even when we were testing the ITV, we were like, why don't they just use these, like razors? Yeah. Because those things cost, I think they're like $125,000 each or $150,000 for each one of those vehicles. Right. And, you can go buy one of those UTVs for like $15,000. But I think that was kind of the point. I think that was the point of having the 120 millimeter mortar, but it was just never, I don't even know if they've ever even shot that in combat. I don't think any unit's ever taken that 120 to Afghanistan. I know the Army obviously uses 120s, and there are 120s over there, but I don't think that specific weapon system was ever actually utilized for anything. Yeah. But I know what you're saying, though. Yeah, I think 105s or 120s, either one, having one of those stick around is probably a better option than having a HIMARS that's just, a great asset. But when HIMARS was out and we were talking through HIMARS and learning about it, that's like a division level asset. That's a strategic level, like in real life. Like if we're not talking about popping IED emplacers with, $150,000 rockets in Afghanistan, we're talking about a real, like what they were meant to be. They're like strategic level assets to take out, bigger targets and stuff like that. And it's morphed into, we're doing call for fire and dropping, this rocket on 2 IED emplacers, which is totally cool with me. I was totally fine with doing that. And we had great success with that. I do remember though, I came back, me and Captain Scholl, who was my FSO, we came back and the 10th Marine Regimental CO wanted to talk to us. We had just gotten back with our deployment with 3-6, and I don't remember his name, who it was at the time. But we came in and sat down in his office, and he was like, hey, how was the deployment? Did you guys get any call for fire? And I kind of explained how I did all the call for fire from the COC. I was like, yeah, we use this. And he's like, what were you using the HIMARS for? And I was telling him like some of the IED emplacers. He's like, that's such a waste of an asset. I can't believe you guys did that. It's a waste of money, this. And I'm like, are you really telling me like what I was doing was wrong? Like I smoked a dude that just came from Pakistan to teach guys how to put in IEDs. Like, I don't know. It was just his perspective was so off base of what the reality of how these weapon systems are being used. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's just, it's a morphing thing. It's just constantly like, and you have to be able to look ahead, and hopefully the commandant is seeing something in his, he has some reason why he decided to pull tanks and change out artillery and stuff like that. But
and I'm sure it's a compromise, like every decision, right? Like, okay, there's nobody is saying that tanks and tube artillery aren't a great asset, but you look at it and you're like, okay, but maybe something else like drones or different weapon systems are a better asset for what we're going to be facing first. And we gotta stay at 180,000 people. So this is how we're going to do it. And
drones are going to start taking a weird place in combat. And I mean, between drones and cyber, that's going to be the warfare of the future. It's going to be just, clouds of drones flying in, swarming in on targets, taking them out, and then dudes sending viruses over, email or something to fuck, like look at what we did to Iran. I think it was Iran where we sent some kind of virus or whatever to them. It made them where their centrifuges spun up too fast, stuff like that. Yeah. It's like that weird stuff that it's not as, sexy, I guess, or as like heroic sounding, but it's like has way more of effect on, I don't know, the battle, I guess, the digital battle than we could ever, I don't know, man. It's it's interesting to think about where warfare is going. Like at some point, it's just going to be a bunch of drones fighting each other.
Yeah, right.
You know.
I mean, I guess you could kind of look at a lot of things that have changed in the military even since I've been in, but like, the O5s are gone and self-propels are gone. And when those decisions were made, I'm sure there were people who were around like, what are we going to do for, protected artillery that, and somehow we've done okay without it. And, I think it's a lot of pain for people who have invested an entire career into an MOS, right? Like tanks, into a community like tanks and artillery. And then to see it kind of go away, you lose that nostalgia. And we always kind of want to embrace the nostalgia and I remember when kind of stuff. But, the Marine Corps is going to be okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And I trust that he's making a lot more informed decisions than you and I are. He's probably got access to information that you and I don't have.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to rely on the fact that he's a smart guy that's been in the Marine Corps for over 30 years and has seen a lot of stuff. And he's looked at this and said, here's the direction we need to go. And I trust him. I just hope he's right. Like I said, like that's my caveat. Like
for sure,
if he's wrong, man, we're going to be in for a world of it. But it'll also be interesting to see, like, I think the people in the Anglico community are always so scared because we went away once before. Like, is that going to happen again?
I think that, it could. It definitely could. Maybe not so much as not. Maybe the chances of it are less now because of moving artillery away from the battalions. There's more of a need for an Anglico than there are for scouts at an artillery battalion now. It seems like so maybe they'll plus up the Anglicos and cut back on the guys that are at the actual battalion. But
I've heard through the grapevine that the Anglico community is actually going to come out of this okay. That there's they're not talking about getting rid of the Anglico community. Maybe. And I don't have any insight into this, but it would make sense to me that like you would broaden their mission a little bit, right? Like, why does it just have to support everybody except the Marine Corps? Like, why can't we, support the Marine Corps too? Like, maybe they'll figure that out. But
yeah, I don't know. I wish I don't know. Anglico does a ton of great stuff. I wish they were more integrated with some other units though.
Yeah,
for sure. Like we already send guys to work with recon. I wish that was more of a formal relationship rather than a phone call like, hey, man, can you send a guy over here to help us with planning? I think that should be more formalized because you do a lot of stuff together anyway. And I don't know. But you're right. I think Anglico is going to stick around. I think people realize the mistake of getting rid of the Anglico and having to rebuild that institutional knowledge like we talked about before.
Yeah.
And those relationships too. Because I mean, I know guys that know dudes in the British Army that are in regular touch with them because they did exercise with them every year because 148 Battery or the Royal Marines would come over and do Burmese chase and stuff like that. So these these relationships with people that you're actually going to be real life supporting in combat and stuff like that are there, Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know what the future is for observers, but who knows?
It looks like the LAR community is going to come out of this okay. I mean that's a community that's been around for a long time too, and
aren't they working on getting a new LAV for them as well?
I heard. They've got to be.
The LAVs are old, man.
Yeah, with this new armored combat vehicle coming online, maybe I don't know, but I'll tell you that was a great community. I loved being in that too. I feel like maybe if I had been a tanker on active duty or an LAR guy on active duty, like I could have seen myself staying in a little bit longer because I had a lot of fun in those communities. Those are great. And like the LAR community, like especially as a fire sport guy, that's a thinking community. That community is moving too fast to not be a thinker. Like you've got to be a smart, three-dimensional thinker, and you've got to understand fire support and maneuver together, working together in the LAR community. It just moves too fast to not be able to think like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and with that, you have to be able to send people over there to support those because those aren't necessarily the, I guess, like sexy missions, like sending a guy to LAR for 2 years or whatever. Like some people don't want it because if you don't send an independent like 0861 like sergeant over there or JTAC that can put out what he's trying to do. I think it's very easy for someone that's a 6'1" to get sent over there and become part of the S3 and just become like the weigh-in guy at fucking, or PFT holding a stopwatch guy rather than actually doing your job, if guys don't push back. Yeah. LAR though, man, definitely a great group of dudes. or when I worked with them, and the vehicles. I'll tell you what, man, it's so nice having such a big ass vehicle to put all your stuff in, and it's a comfortable ride, and like you're living out of those trucks is like a fun time. I wish I would have gotten to like jump in and shoot one of those 25 millimeter or 30 millimeter Bushmasters, but never got the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great weapon system. Do you think it makes some time to take a few more minutes and like talk a little bit more about the reserves and like the Anglo stuff? Like, would that be helpful to your listeners?
Let's whatever you want to talk about. We'll take about 20 more minutes and then we'll kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, so in there, where I didn't really spend a whole lot of time was like talking about my time at 4th Anglo, and they've got 4th Anglo, they've got 6th Anglo now, 3rd Anglo's in the reserves. Like I don't know if 6th is coming or going. I don't really know anything about that. They're sort of the new guys on the block, right?
Yeah, and they just moved again. I think they just moved their CP from one place to another.
Did they? Okay.
Because they were right outside of San Francisco up in that area, but I think now they are out of not Tacoma, whatever that base is right there. Maybe it is Tacoma.
Yeah, Yakima, or could it be like Joint Base Lewis McChord?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, but here's the thing about the Reserve Anglo. So this will be my little sales pitch for the community. Like, if you're a fire supporter out on active duty, or you're in 1st or 2nd Anglo on active duty, and you want to try out the reserves, like, I really enjoyed my time at 4th Anglo, and I would have had just as good of a time at 3rd Anglo. I lived on the East Coast, so it didn't make sense. But Chris was kind of talking about like when you're on active duty, I had my FIC team, and that was my FIC team, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you didn't in the reserves. What ends up happening is remember I was talking before about like how you've got 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer, but you can rob Peter and pay. You can play Tetris with those drill weekends. So like some people are like, okay, I'm a school teacher, so I have all summer off. So I'm going to do all of my drills in 1 month, the month of July, and then I'm going to do my AT for 2 weeks. So I'm going to be on active duty for 6 weeks.
Okay.
And if the command supports that, you can do that. That's a lot easier to do in the Anglo community because they are piecemealing teams together to support whatever mission they've been given, right? So you may administratively have a brigade platoon or 2nd Brigade platoon or something like that, but for the most part, anytime an op gets dropped onto the op shop, they're going to cobble together the people who are available to do it. So you never really work with the same FIC team. You kind of work with the same dudes in your platoon. And so if somebody's really looking for a lot of freedom, it says like, I don't want to do that. Like if you join an infantry battalion or an infantry company or an artillery battery, like you're going to drill when everyone else drills and that's it, unless you have some sort of massive exception, like you're getting married or funeral or something like that. Like the unit drills together, like an artillery battery has to drill together. Anglico can cobble together 5 or 7 guys and send them out on an op just based on availability.
Yeah.
So really a great opportunity in the reserves to have that massive flexibility to be able to really pick and choose your drill. So if you're a student and you're like, okay, I'm not going to do anything over the summer, it's a lot more supportive to go to an Anglico unit and say like, here, like I can't drill November, December, January, February, but I can drill this. And they'll just say like, great, well, we'll put you on this African Lion operation, or we'll put you on this, Cobra Gold or whatever these operations are you can go out and do. So there's a ton of flexibility in the reserves to not have to do the traditional, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer kind of schedule.
I've actually heard guys say that some reserve units will let you come on active duty quite a bit if you want to. Like some units have more funding, but they also have more obligations that they have to fulfill. And so because of that, it's like, hey, I got the summer off. Like, okay, well, we could probably use you the entire summer. So you could actually stay on active duty for an extended period of time to go support different, training evolutions or like a deployment or something like that,
right,
like you were talking about. Is that kind of the case, or?
Yeah. And so specific to the Anglico community, now, again, it's been a while since I've been down there, but I can't imagine that it's changed all that much. But there's different pots of money, right? So you've got your reserve money for drill weekends, and that's kind of one bucket of money. And then you got this thing called ADOS, which is additional duties. I don't even know. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's like they have a pot of funds that they can bring people onto status, like drilling status, without burning their drill time also. So like it's a special thing. So you could be brought on ADOS orders for like to go support an exercise. So if somebody's getting out of the military, but kind of like gapping into whatever their next career is going to be, and they want to find a way to generate a paycheck, here's the ultimate scenario. You've already done your 4 years, so you're non-obligated. Remember I was talking before about non-ob, right? So you're not obligated, okay? So you're an at-will employee who doesn't really have a job yet, doesn't really know what they're doing, and wants to create some sort of income opportunities that you can flex into and flex out of as you want to. Anglico is a perfect community for that, especially if you're coming out of the Anglico or fire sport community. You should say like, okay, I don't really have a job yet. I'm looking for a job. I'm not obligated. So if I join 4th Anglico and I don't like it, I can quit the next day and I'm kind of net the same. But the Anglico community has opportunities to not only drill, but to be on active duty too. So if you're like, hey, I really need a paycheck for the next month, great, go to jump school, right? Or go to Fort Sill, or so they have the school operative JTAC or something like that.
Yeah.
They get a lot. They have seats, and more often than not, those seats don't get filled because people don't have. It's not that they don't have qualified Marines to go to those schools. They don't have people who can take 3 weeks off to go to those schools.
Yeah, because they're all living real lives too.
Right. So if you go to jump school as a reserve Marine, you still have to do your drills. Right. Those are two different things, right? You get put on orders to go to jump school. You still have to do your however many drills you have to do 2 weeks in the summer. So let's just call it 24 days. So there's that. So it's a great opportunity to kind of flex in and out of things. I mean, you could probably stay on some sort of status where you're getting paid your paycheck for a huge amount of the year if you wanted to, just by going on and off of exercises. And then you could just ghost for a year, right? If you've done everything that you're required to do, I'll make up a scenario. Let's just say that I decide, okay, I'm going to drill, and I'm going to do all of my drills in January. Like, it's going to take my 2 days a month, right? So let's just call it 24 days that you have to drill. And I'm going to drill the entire month of January. And then bye, right?
That's crazy. That's an option.
They wouldn't let you do that, but technically, right? You have fulfilled your obligation for that year because you've done your 24 days of drill, right? Yeah. See, there's some other math in there too. But you want to have what's called a SAT year, a satisfactory year, and that's done by points. So you get 15 points just for being affiliated with the unit, free points, right? So there's 15 of the 50 that you got to have. And then there's your 24 days of drills. Okay, so now you're at 36. Did I do that math right? And then you've got to make up another 15. Let's call it somehow else, and that's usually your 15 days of your 2 weeks in the summer.
Yeah, your AT.
Right? Because that's not drill. So that's your AT. So if you do all those things, you will get 50 points, and you have to have 50 points at your anniversary date. Basically is calculated on the day you came in the Marine Corps. So your pay entry base date is your anniversary date. So as long as you get 50 points by your anniversary, your pay entry base date, that year counts towards your retirement.
Okay.
So how you Tetris those together is a function of two things. One, the command that you join, will they let you do it that way? Like an artillery battery won't. But an Anglico or a recon unit, or maybe an intelligence unit or something like that, probably will. Or like a what are those civil affairs units? I mean, any of those like that are doing weird things. They, you can really piece together a career, and the next thing you know, you can end up stringing together 20 years without even really having to do the traditional 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing, and I know a lot of guys get out and go that route. They're like, you know what, like you said, I need a paycheck for a little bit. My next few months or my next year is kind of questionable, so I'd like to have something coming in. So I'm going to go and do the reserves and stuff like that. I've had quite a few people from other MOSs hit me up and talk about, especially infantry guys, hit me up and talk about going into the reserves and going over to Anglico and kind of what they could expect and stuff. And you can correct anything I'm about to say as being incorrect, or correct me if you want. But I always tell them, I'm like, hey man, from what I've seen, as an active duty guy looking at the reserve side, at the reserve Anglicos, like, you are going to go over there. The first thing they're going to do is process you into the unit or whatever, do all that stuff. Then they're going to send you to MOS school. Like, you're going to have to go back to Fort Sill, or you're going to have to go to Fort Sill and become an 0861 and then come back. And then I was like, at the active duty units, when you pick up sergeant, not at Anglico, but in an artillery unit, you were screened automatically for TACP school just because there's a shortage of JTACs and sergeants the lowest you can go. So you're screened automatically. And I tell them, like, the chances of becoming a JTAC at an Anglico, at a reserve Anglico, is better than becoming a JTAC at an active Anglico. Just because I think they allow more people to go through. Whereas at the active duty ones, it's the assault chief is the JTAC, the assault leader is a JTAC, and then you have your, like, it's not as easy to go become a JTAC on active duty from what I've seen. But anyway, a lot of guys I know have used that as like a tool for them after they've gotten out, and a lot of them really enjoy it. I know Fourth Anglico is down in Palm Beach in Florida and stuff like that.
Palm Beach, yep.
And I think I went to like Chiefs course with a couple of those guys, and the coolest guys, the guys I've met, they all were super good dudes, and they really enjoyed it, and they all seemed to make it sound like it was a great place to be. My only concern as an active duty guy looking at them was like, man, we train a lot, even on the active side, to make sure our guys understand CAS and fire support and stuff like that. It's like, and I look at them like they're only doing this part of the time. So I don't have any trust in a reservist that's coming on and getting on the hooks until I've heard them do a couple controls and I can feel that.
And that's well founded, right? So like, let's continue with the Anglico community for a second, right? Because like basically they just think of all the things that an Anglico Marine has to do inside of the 24 days that they're allotted of 1 week in a month, and then the 14 days that they're allotted for an AT, right?
Yeah.
You've got all the bullshit you need to do as a regular Marine. PFT, CFT, Marine Corps ball, rifle range, pistol range if you need to do that.
Cyber awareness, SACO, all that.
All that stuff. So here's what ends up happening in the reserves, right? Is some of that stuff gets done online, and then some of those classes that on active duty they take 90 minutes to do, they're done in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's just it's
because you guys don't have to fill the schedule.
That's right. There is no way you can get all the stuff that you need to get done in the reserves by the book with the amount of time that you have. It's impossible. Your annual training, just look at all the hours of annual training you're having. You're like, there's the whole year right there. I mean, and that doesn't even include the rifle range, stuff like that. So everybody just kind of does their best job they can. But now take that to the Anglico Marine. So now you've got, at the reserve Anglicos, you've got, at some point, if they're sticking around long enough, a requirement to maintain jump proficiency, right? So you've got to find time to get to that unit inside of every 90 days to maintain your airborne qualification, your airborne status, right? In order to stay on jump pay and all that stuff. So every 90 days, you got to do a jump. And you don't just show up at the unit and do a jump. Yeah. There's like pre-jump training and the sand pit and the PLFs, and then you're going to do your briefs and go to the airfield. And I mean, that's,
There's a lot of logistics behind scheduling air, scheduling every ranges. Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have to come in on your own time to probably do the jump. Or sometimes what they'll do is they'll say like, okay, drill is going to be on Saturday and Sunday, but for jumpers, come in on Thursday. And we're going to do pre-jump training on Thursday. We're going to do the airborne operation on Friday, and then we'll have drill. So they'll do that. Now, not only are you airborne qualified, now you're a JTAC, right? So now you got to keep up your quals to be a JTAC, because that's different. Like if you go outside your 90-day window on airborne, you just have to do a little extra training, right, to come back up. You lose your qual in JTAC, that's a problem.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal, right? So now you've got that. So think about how hard it is for an Anglico Marine to maintain all of those proficiencies at once. And here's what ends up happening. They are scraping by just to maintain their basic level of proficiency, with the idea being that no one, like when I was a JTAC down in Anglico, there was no way that I was going to get activated and sent out to be a JTAC, and like you're going to have your workups. So in the reserves, kind of think like, hey, if we're going to get activated, we're going to go through a workup. And that's where we'll be every single day, Monday through Saturday, doing our stuff.
Refining everything.
And the proficiency will come up. Like, so not at first. Like, so if you meet a reservist JTAC, you should absolutely have a critical eye on them and be holding their hand and watching over their shoulder, just like you would a brand new JTAC that comes into your unit, right? And they'll probably just come up to speed a little bit faster because they got the lingo and they know it. But that's what's going to happen. But that's why the opportunities to drill are so great at Anglico, because there's all that stuff that you can do. But here's the downside to the Anglico community in the reserves is you get some of that homesteading, right? So you get the guys that have been like, I've been here, done that, done this 100 different times. This is the way we do it. And that can be a little bit detrimental to a unit. You can also get a little bit of this jump club mentality. Mm-hmm. So you'll have the segment of guys who already have their gold wings. And they're like, fuck it, I don't feel like doing that. I'm going to get hurt, whatever. So once they get their gold wings, they stop wanting to do the airborne operations, right? Mm-hmm. Then you got all the guys who want their gold wings. That's all they want to do is airborne operations. So that sort of push and pull can end up really messing up a unit and turning it into like not a jump club mentality, but a jump centric mentality where people either think about how do I get out of doing the jump or how do I get this jump so I can get my gold wings, all that kind of stuff. And so you can get a little bit of that. And then the coming and going, like there's just no unit continuity. There's no, there's no developing SOPs with anybody unless you get chopped as a det to go support an active duty Anglico, which is what they basically do. So when I was there, and this was a decade ago, but when I was there, they would take assault reinforced basically. Think of it like a MUDET, right? It would be assault plus and a FIC, and they'd take those guys and they'd ship them up to second Anglico, and they would augment their shortage of people that they have so they could get up to TO and head overseas. So there was a lot of that going on. So unless you're going to join a unit that's going to det out to something, you're not going to get any sort of continuity. There is no I have my FIC team or I have my SALT. It's I'm showing up to drill and whoever's around, we're going to do some training in the simulator or whatever it is.
Yeah, I never saw the reinforcement of active duty teams with reservists. However, I do know that it's something that they definitely did in Afghanistan. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was definitely like if you were with 1st Anglico, then you probably had some 3rd Anglico guys out there or some 4th Anglico guys out there with you. That was definitely I think they usually throw a FICT on there, like you said, a firepower control team to reinforce them there. But no, man, I think I really appreciate your the perspective, of the reserve side. Like, it's something I really considered when I was getting out. My buddy's like, bro, dude, you're a JTAC-E.
Yeah, I'm surprised
you're a staff sergeant.
Give it a try.
He's like, if you want to, he was already at 4th Anglico or 3rd. No, he was at 3rd Anglico. He's like, if you want to come over here, man, he's like, they would love to have you. And he's like, you can basically write your own training schedule. He's like, because you have enough seniority and like, the skill sets that they're looking for, that they'll let you take dudes and go do what you want, what you need to do. And I'm like, man, that sounds really like a really good idea. But at the same time, I was getting out and, I had a tough decision. It was like, okay, do I want to jump into the contracting world or jump into the GS world? Because I had a couple opportunities that knocked at the door for stuff like that. Because if you're a JTAC or a JTAC-E, there's people out there that are looking for you that would love to give you a job overseas or something. And so I had a few of those opportunities knocking at the door. And then the other option was go to school. And I was like, you know what, man? Like, if I go to school, I don't want to be in the reserves just because I'd hate to like, oh shit, we're going to war with Iran. Now you're getting activated. Like, am I ever actually going to get to finish school? I just saw it as a possible roadblock into finishing it. And I told myself, I'm like, at some point you're going to have to let all this shit go. Like, you can't be a JTAC and do all this cool stuff forever. Like, at some point. So it's like, am I trying to keep going with this, like keep it going as long as I can, or should I just cut it off and just be done with the military and be done with working for the government? And, that's the path I took. I was like, you know what? I just don't want to deal with any of the bullshit. I think a lot of the reasons that I decided to get out of the Marine Corps in general, I would see all that shit again in the reserves, like I just don't want to deal with it. And that's the only reason I didn't do it. But And don't get me wrong, it's definitely crossed my mind a few times to be like, maybe I should give him a call and, maybe I could still jump over there. But I'm beyond that now, just like I think I'm beyond any of the contracting work. But it's definitely a good option for guys that aren't really sure what they're going to be doing or know what they want to do, right? And stuff like that. So I appreciate
I'd probably be slaughtered for saying it this way, but I'll kind of package it like this. The important thing to remember is you're an at-will employee. Yeah. Right, especially if you're outside of that 8-year mark and you're not even obligated to be in the IRR anymore. Like, if you're outside that, you can drill. And here's what I did. And I did not ingratiate myself to senior officers when I did this, but I felt like I had an obligation to be completely candid about what I was willing to do and what I was not willing to do in the reserves. And every time I joined a unit, I said this to the commanding officer. Here's the thing you need to understand about me. If this unit gets activated to go to war, I will be the first person here with my gear on. If you come to me and say, we need you to go fill this 1-year IA billet, I am going to say no.
Yeah.
And if you force me, I will sign out. I will check out of this unit 5 minutes later. I will quit. You need to hear me say that. I own my own business. I have a civilian life. I got out of the military. Here are the parameters that I'm willing to participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there were people who fucking hated my guts because of that, because I wore that. I didn't try to sugarcoat that at all. I was like, here are the parameters. Like, if you want me to join if you will have me in these parameters, then I am going to be in it to win it. But
that's such a weird world that you even can say that, though.
I know, right?
Like, here's what I'll do for you, but
and that's the thing. Like, as a reservist, you have to embrace something that is very unnatural to us as Marines, because we're always like mission first, unit first, like bullshit. You invert that in the reserves. You're like, listen, I got out for a reason. Now, here are the parameters that I'm willing to participate within. But, you know, if you change the rules on me, I'm quitting. Now, here's the thing about quitting. If you actually pull that card and you say, I quit, you have to understand what the consequences of that, right? You are going to get an adverse fitness report. You are never going to be allowed to come back into the reserves ever again. So you got to be really willing to say, fuck it. I don't care. I am out.
Yeah.
And you got to be willing to pull that card and back it up. But I always found that if I was just completely honest with people and said, like, listen, I'm not, you'll never get me to volunteer to go on an IA job just because Headquarters Marine Corps needs a body, right? Mm-hmm. There's 180,000 bodies. They don't need Dave Armstrong to uproot his life to go fill this mission, right?
Yeah.
You're looking for me to say yes because that's the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do it. So, like, hey, if Mike Battery 314 got activated to go somewhere, I would have been the first one there, you know, in formation. But outside of that, like, call me up and say, like, hey, they're looking for a major who's an 0802, you know, and you're the only one in the unit that fits the bill, so we've got to send you. I'd be like, where's my checkout sheet?
Yeah. See,
you know? And then you still have the same problem. If
I'd have had an option like that when they gave me orders to go to the MU in 2014 or 15, whatever it was, I probably would still be in. That was my, like, when they were like, hey, we're going to send you to the MU as the fires chief. And I'm like, I told them, I'm like, if you send me to the MU, I'm getting out. I was like, because to me, that's a slap in the face, because a lot of times, and it's nothing against MU fires chief, but a lot of times MU fires chiefs aren't the best 0861s. A lot of times they're dudes coming off recruiting duty, you know, that's like the, hey, let's get you back in the saddle kind of job. And for me, having been at that point a JTAC evaluator, I've already been a fires chief, you know, I'd been at Anglico for a couple times. I'd done 4 deployments already. For them to take me at a time where I was like, I'm at my peak right now. Like, I'm the best 0861 I've ever been. I'm the best JTAC I've ever been. And to pull me from that to go do some bullshit over at the MU where I knew I wasn't going to be doing anything. And I knew that because I was on the MU the year before. I saw what the fires chief did. And for them to pull me to go do that, I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. And I can't believe that after everything I've done for the Marine Corps, you know, everything I've done, that you can't find someone else that can take that job and go do that. You know, I've done 4 deployments up to this point. There are 0861 staff sergeants that aren't JTACs, that haven't been to Chiefs course, that haven't deployed. Find one of those fucking dudes and send them, you know? Right. And that's, like we mentioned this, I think we talked about this way at the very beginning of the podcast about how, you know, you're looking around at other people that are the same rank, getting the same pay, getting, you know, you're the one going to the field all the time, or you're the one that's deployed all the time, and they always have a reason they can't deploy, or they have a reason they can't go to the field, and it's just, you get tired of it, you know?
Yeah.
You get, that's why a lot of guys from a lot of Marine JTACs look at the Air Force JTAC option as a viable option when they get out, because they're like, well, if I go over to the Air Force, not only am I going to get to keep my rank, I'm going to get to be a JTAC nonstop. That's all I do. You know, there's no threat of, hey, you're going to go be a fire chief in 2 years. There's none of that. And once you have a years of experience as a JTAC, 1 year, I think it's 1 year of experience, you get $400 extra a month on your paycheck, because they understand that it's a job where you're gone all the time. It's a high stress, you know, and it's like, to see that and then to look back at how the Marine Corps is treating you, like, hey, I know you just got back from deployment, but we want you to go do this deployment too. Well, what's Bobby over here fucking doing? Like, what, you know? Yeah. Anyway, that's my rant there.
That's when we get back to like what I was talking about, I don't know, 3 hours ago now, but you know, that whole leadership JJ did Ty Buckle, that's not the half of it, man.
Yeah.
Like, the Marine Corps gets so much wrong about leadership because they don't value treating people with empathy and compassion, because we're fucking Marines. And we
Yeah,
don't
like trying to tell you you're going to the
shit.
Trying to tell you you're going to the field while you're in the middle of your master's program. It's like, hey man, I get it, but like this is also a huge deal. This is going through a master's program isn't something where you're like, well, I'll just kick that off to the side and I'll take care of it later. Like that's a fucking thing. Like that's
yeah. You want me to delay my life by a year because you need somebody for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so that's it. And so on the reserve side, I saw this too. I will say this because I know we're wrapping up. I will say, like, if anybody's listening to this right now and they're on active duty or they haven't been off active duty for that long, like, it's costless to go try the reserves out because you can just quit. I think there's this conception that you enlist and you have no, you are an at-will employee. And if you ever joined a unit and decided it wasn't for you, there are ways to gracefully remove yourself by just saying things that, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to be the person who gives somebody a class on how to quit the reserves. But if I was, it would probably sound something like this. Hey, my life has gotten really hectic. School, this is way more than I thought. I need to take a breather. I'm going to check out, finish up school, and I'll reach back out to you when things settle down and come back in. Like, you can gracefully remove yourself.
That's so crazy that you can just do that. Be like, hey, I got stuff going on. I'll call you in 6 months.
If you're non-obligated, yeah.
See, because my initial thought when I was getting out was I thought if you went into the reserves, you had to sign a contract, like another, like, hey, you're in the reserves for 4 years, even though you're only coming, I didn't know. This is obviously enlightening for me too.
Unless the rules have changed in the past, 4 years since I've been out. I mean, that's the way it worked.
It's probably the same way.
Time. Yeah. Now, like I said, you are damaging your professional reputation and chewing equity every time you do that. You've got to be really careful about it, because it can be misperceived, or if you package it wrong, you can end up with a shitty fitness report. But the whole thing about the reserves is if you can get by with making those 50 points a year, that's your one more year. So I don't know how many years you got, but like, I know a lot of people that get out like at the 10-year mark. I'm like, shit, man, if you had just done 10 more years, 50 points a year, it's nothing.
I did 12 years.
Yeah. See, if you had done 8 more years, like my last 3 years in the Marines, I didn't even drill in the reserves.
Oh, really?
I did online command and staff, which is like the PME level for majors.
Yeah.
I did. And that was basically, I had to like read at home, take some online tests. So for 2 years I did online stuff. That was enough points to get me a SAT year. And then in my very last year, because of my knee surgery, I couldn't get back onto like medical status, but I had 1 more year to go until I hit my 20. Mm-hmm. And so I was online taking MCIs. Like I was taking every single language MCI that you could do. Like, I mean, but you look at my record, I speak Korean, Russian, German. I mean, because I just went through into the MCIs, and I would get like 10 or 15 points for that MCI, and I'd call, you get points for doing MCIs. I was down to taking like basic operation of the saw for one point just to kind of get that last year done. But
yeah,
you can drop out of being a drilling reservist and still be getting points by doing online PME.
That's weird. Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know. I mean, I still don't think I would have done it personally. Just my own path doesn't. I don't see that. A lot of people gave me that question though, like, dude, you're getting out at 12 years. It's only 8 more years, and I'm like, dude, 8 years is a long time. And I'm talking about active duty, maybe not reserves, but on active duty, I'm like, 8 years is a long fucking time, man. Like, I deployed. All 5 of my deployments were between 2009 and 2016. So in 7 years, I did 5 deployments. And it's like. To ask me to come, and again, I was a JTAC too, so it's not like it was like 8 more years of just doing whatever. Like, they had a deployment they wanted me to go on as soon as I got back from my MEU. Like, they asked me to turn around and go out 2 weeks after I got home from deployment, and I'm like, whoa, dude, I just got home, know. And then 2 months later, they asked me again, hey, you want to go to Japan for a UDP? And I'm like, no, dude, I'm getting out. It's just It's one of those things where you get the qualifications and stuff, and people just want you to work, and then that's when you get really disgruntled at the guys that don't do shit.
Yeah.
And you look at them and you're like, you're a piece of shit, man.
Yeah. And, there's another cool thing to know about the reserves too, is that you don't have to join the reserve unit that's in your hometown either. Right. Yeah. So like if you live in Des Moines, Iowa, and you want to drill with 4th Anglo-Co, and you're going to get a paycheck, there are certain billets, usually like if you're a critical billet, they call it, they will reimburse you up to, I don't know, $300 for your flight, right? Okay. So a lot of times, like when I went down to 4th Anglo-Co, I was not in a critical billet, but I would take my drill paycheck and burn it just to pay for the flight, because I was doing Marine stuff that I like to do. I
Yeah,
wanted
it
to
was
be
worth
that
it.
unit, and I was getting my points for retirement. So it wasn't like I wasn't just doing it for free. I was
Yeah.
just subsidizing the travel and everything. So you can join whatever unit you want to. And if you think about this, like an Anglo unit, let's just say you're in, again, Denver, Colorado, right? And you're like, okay, well, I don't live near 3rd Anglico, but this is what you do. You do that 2 weeks of drill. You say like, hey, I'm available to drill for 2 weeks in July. Are there any operations going on? Yes, great. I'm going to do that operation. Fly there once, fly there back, but you got the 14 days of drill paying for it. So like the cost of the flight, you just
Yeah.
factor it in. You factor it in as like, like accounting, like cost of goods sold.
That's kind of how Walker was doing it, because he lives in New
Yeah.
York City and he was flying down to Florida and stuff.
Yeah.
And he made it sound like there's quite a few guys that just enjoyed being at 4th Anglico so much that they were paying out of pocket for the travel expenses like you were talking about.
Yeah. It's a no bullshit.
That's cool, man.
Like, yeah. So I guess my final pitch on the reserves is like, it's costless to try it,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I guess, you go 1 weekend, you get like $250 or whatever.
Whatever
Might as well go check it out and get your paycheck.
And it's all unit dependent, right? So like, here's the thing I'll tell you about the reserves too. Like you want to know what makes the reserves suck? It's the fucking officers and the fucking staff NCOs.
That's why you fire them all.
They're the worst, right?
Yeah.
They're 80%. It's never the sergeants and below, right?
Yeah.
They're on their first enlistment, second enlistment. They're loving it, right? They're doing that. It's the staff NCO and officer level that can make or break a unit for like 2 years and maybe even longer than that too.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. Same way on the active side too. A lot of times it's like poor leadership or disgruntled people. I was becoming one of those disgruntled people on my way out. That last 6 months you're in, as a staff sergeant, I was just like, fuck this, fuck that, this is stupid. I wasn't afraid to say something was stupid, because what are they going to do? I'm getting out. I didn't care.
Right, yeah.
But I know what you're saying though.
Or go look at, like you said, like cross-tech into one of the other services too. A lot of Marines from Mike Battery, the 0861s, you get to a certain point in a battery, you just can't go up anymore as an 0861. You keep getting promoted, but your billet doesn't go up. So a lot of these guys were getting the staff NCO level, and they were shifting over to the National Guard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of guys do that. That's definitely an option out there.
Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you coming on again. And
yeah,
I
dude,
definitely
it's fun.
We'll definitely do it again later on, because I think just the back and forth, I think we go down some crazy rabbit holes, and I feel like I'm rambling sometimes, but it's just thinking through all the stuff that we're discussing. A lot of the what ifs and stuff that we go down.
You're one of the few people that can talk to me for 3 hours and not get bored. So
oh yeah, no, I'm becoming a pro at it. To me, I look back, like when I'm talking to people and I'll look at the clock and see how long we've been going. I'm like, holy shit, like we've been going for 2 hours already.
Yeah.
It's like, damn, we've been going for over an hour and I haven't even got to the point that I was wanting to make about this podcast.
Right.
But it's just, there's just so much good information out there.
Yeah. Well, my quick end here too is like, you and I talked about this in the last podcast, but I'm conceptualizing my own podcast for the future, and I'm working on getting that together. But I'd love to have you back on and reverse the roles and let me talk to you and ask you questions about like leadership and some of the things we were talking about before. Like maybe a great interview for you and I to have would be like, we sit down and have a really frank conversation about officer staff NCO relationships. Like, what was your perspective as a staff NCO dealing with a lieutenant or a captain? Like, what were your experiences and what did you wish was better about that relationship? Or like maybe some really frank conversations about two guys who are out, one who's an officer and one who was a staff NCO, talking about leadership, could be really valuable to either young lieutenants or at TBS that want to listen, or even sergeants who are about to become staff NCOs and become a platoon sergeant.
100%. I love talking. Talking about stuff like that. I've got a ton of stories and a ton of examples of good and bad leadership over the years. And like many people, I think I took a lot of really bad examples of leadership that I saw from the time I was a private all the way up until I was a sergeant, staff sergeant. And just when I became, in those leadership positions, just like, this is the shit I'm not going to do. This is the stuff I remember, So yeah, for sure, man. You just let me know whenever you want to do that. And when do you have like a date that you are looking to have your podcast up by?
Yeah. So I'm going to try to launch like after Labor Day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Some of this home quarantine and has impacted my ability to actually get it going, because work is kind of crazy when you're not around everyone else that you work with. But that's my goal. And as you know, and I appreciate you kind of doing a little bit of soft advertising for me, or influencer advertising for me too. But I started that new Instagram channel, which is fledgling. But you got to start somewhere. But that's where I'm going to launch the podcast from, and I call it the General's View because what my goal is, like, I want to start, like, I've got about 10 or 12 friends who are like retired generals from all the services, and I want to start by interviewing the generals, and like I want to get their view on leadership from their perspective as a general, because like most of us never get to sit down and talk with a general.
Yeah, it's just a weird concept to even like, oh, that guy was a general. You're like, whoa, like, oh, okay, like, that's kind of weird.
And say like, geez, tell us about some stories. Tell us about some of your leadership. Like, what was your first platoon sergeant like when you were a second lieutenant general? Like, just hear some of their stories about leadership, and like, hey, here's what's really hard about leading as a general. I've got to make decisions about whether or not I'm going to get rid of a whole tank community. Yeah.
Like
those guys are making those decisions, and it's probably pretty interesting to hear their view on things. So.
Yeah, not just the thought process. I'd love to hear. I like to hear anybody that's successful. Even people that aren't successful, I like to hear the thought process that people go through when they're like making a decision or something like that, because it helps me understand, one, why they did it. Like, why was this decision made? Well, this is what I was thinking. Okay, that makes sense. And it kind of gives you a inside look of like the details that they're considering that you may not have considered. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think it's great, because there may not be, there are some generals out there that are probably aren't any good, or aren't, like good generals or whatever. But I know that you don't even make it to that level, just like you don't make it to a sergeant major or master guns without being good at something. And, somehow setting yourself aside. That's just the general level is just such a weird, I don't know, for me, having been around military my whole life, it's kind of like one of those, like, it's a celebrity almost, but not really,
Yeah, and they're bifurcated too. Like, there's a massive difference between being a 2-star general and a 3-star general.
Yeah.
Like that, the 3-star and the 4-star generals, those are the elephants in the tall grass. Like, you don't ever want to get trampled on by them. So like a 1-star general is like the second lieutenant of the general group.
I know, which is so weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure, man. You just let me know. Let me know whenever you want to do it, and we'll set it up. And it's funny, the last podcast we did together, I changed up the format of the actual video so that I have me on it and my guest on it the whole time. And then I have my logo in the bottom corner. And then I'm like, man, I have all this blank space on the side. So the next episode, I started putting in my Instagram, my guest Instagram, and Twitter. So this episode will have all your information on the sidebar,
that'd be cool. Thanks.
So that'll help. Hopefully that'll help for those that aren't, watching this or listening. Check out on YouTube. Hopefully that'll drive some traffic over to your new Instagram page and get some people over there.
That'd be great too. And I'll also offer this too, if anybody made it this far. Like, if I said something about the reserves, you're like, oh, I really wish that I could understand that better. Like, find me on Instagram and hit me up with a DM and ask me a question. If there's something I said that you're like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about that? I didn't quite understand that. I'd be more than happy to help mentor somebody through the decision-making process of joining the reserves.
That's awesome. And I'm sure people out there will appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show again.
Great talking to you.
I look forward to our next conversations in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Take care.
Have a good week.
You too. Bye-bye.